In a dark cave, a young guy sat in shock and repeated that what happened to him would be the end of him. His hands clutched his blood-red forearm, and his thoughts revolved around death, because he did not know whether he would go to hell or heaven. He was sitting on a flat stone, and in front of him was a virtual neon yellow sign offering to see the end of this world, while the guy himself was still thinking about hell and heaven, and about what the creatures in hell think about heaven. The sign with the inscription that he must see the end of this world continued to hang motionless in the air in front of his face. The guy looked down from her, and then back, continuing to wonder what he would see, and whether he would see the end. He leaned back exhausted on the stone, closing his eyes from fatigue and falling into memories. His name was Kyle, and they asked him about Becca, who was his sister, and someone's adult voice advised them to rest since the drive home was far away, while Kyle himself sat in the back seat of the car and carefully held his little sister's head. The bright light of an oncoming car suddenly illuminated the entire interior of their car. Kyle came to his senses in the same cave, on a flat stone, realizing that it was several years ago, because when he woke up, he was already in this cave, and there was some kind of book nearby in the violet light. The book was called Heavenly Harmony of Pure Art, and that was the only thing Kyle got here. He took this book because it was the last clue to return home, and in it was the only message that said that he needed to see the end of this world, and Kyle did not know if he would be able to return to his family if he followed this instruction. When his strength and endurance were running low, a new neon sign announced that he had completed training. Tired and exhausted, Kyle was surprised by this news. All this time he remained in the cave, tormented by gloomy thoughts. Therefore, the bright light of freedom struck him, because he could not believe that everything was over and he would be able to see his parents and sister Becca. Going to the light, Kyle left the cave, and immediately fell to his knees in disappointment. He was not at home, he was not in his home world, and the place outside the cave turned out to be another martial arts world called Mirim. Kyle hit the ground with his fists in disappointment and anger, because he hoped that after leaving the cave he would get home, but he found himself only at the beginning of another, long journey. The guy could not understand why someone unfamiliar would do this to him, because he had been in the cave for at least 10 years. Kyle stared into the void in front of him, thinking about what he needed to do to see the end of the world. Suddenly a stranger called out to him, saying that he had a nice outfit, and that Kyle was making so much noise that the man heard him. The man said that he wouldn't have done anything to Kayla just like that, but his family was now starving. The stranger was in a bit of static, looked shabby and looked like a robber, pointing a sword and threatening the question of whether the guy would become their food. Kyle was shocked by this situation, because he still had not recovered from leaving the cave. The bloody sword fell to the ground with a dull sound. Kyle backed away from the dead stranger, whose body lay lifeless on the ground. He was sure that he was not guilty, not understanding why everything turned out this way, and a lot of thoughts about the fact that this was the first time he had killed a person, that it was the only way out, and he had no choice, like what he could not do something else, with doubts that anyone would do this, and he didn't know what to do, because the stranger had attacked him, and Kyle wasn't sure that this was not a dream, and whether he had really become a killer. A neon yellow sign suddenly appeared in front of him, informing him that Kyle's external level had increased. The guy hesitantly stood up, stopping near the corpse and thinking that apparently he really killed someone, and this led to an increase in his level. The first nervous chuckles escaped his mouth as he came to his senses. Nervous tension was released through laughter, and it became easier to accept the surrounding reality, because this message allowed him to intuitively understand what needed to be done. That book, Heavenly Harmony of Pure Art, taught him everything, and the levels that were written about there, increasing with each kill, they should help Kyle return to his original world, which means he needs to reach the maximum level. Therefore, in the present time, Kyle has turned into an invincible warrior, inviting the enemy to demonstrate his skills in the next battle. He threatened the head of the demonic sect with a sword while his assistants tried to somehow change the losing situation. Now in this world, Kyle was called the Immortal Sword Emperor, and he couldn't remember which sect leader was in front of him. The leader of the demonic sect claimed that he was also the Immortal Sword Emperor, but Kyle looked at his clothes and realized that he was the 8th head of the sect. The guy began to count on his fingers how many previous leaders of this sect had died at his hands, and it turned out that there were already 6. Kyle said out loud with a carefree smile that the guys from this sect were strange, because he met them every 10 years. However, His carelessness was deceptive, because in just a moment he was able to summon his sword and his magical power, which illuminated his face with blue light. 1 second was enough for Kyle to cut off the head of another leader of the demonic sect with one blow of his sword, and the guy himself reported that, in general, he had fun meeting them again. The same sect acolyte who had tried to help his leader in the beginning jumped at Kyle again with his sword, shouting that he would avenge his master by killing the demon-like bastard he thought Kyle was. Kyle easily dodged the blow, asking whether the novice was serious and whether he was also a member of the demonic sect. The guy easily caught the stranger's face in his palm, because he had unlimited strength. Using his magic, which flooded everything around with blue light, Kyle said that he liked the fighting spirit of this novice. He could not object, since due to Kyle's magic his body stopped obeying its owner. But Kyle didn't stop there, as his magic created an entire wall that divided the world around them into 2 parts with a large border. And behind this wall, the novice saw not that simple smiling guy Kyle, but an otherworldly demon with a frightening face, surrounded by blood. After only a moment, Kyle let the boy go, telling him that such a fighting spirit was normal for his age, and that he should learn something new and come to Kyle again. He added that if he returned, it could cheer him up. Leaving the novice alone in the gorge among the corpses, Kyle admonished him that he should become the next head of the sect. In the evening, the guy threw his sword aside in disappointment, upset that the head of the sect he had killed during the day was a dummy. He leaned against a tree, wondering out loud what he could do to entertain his life now. Throwing his hands behind his head, he indulged in thoughts that perhaps he should create a new sect himself, much stronger than the one he defeated today, and not understanding why everything had become so boring. Tiredly opening his eyes and looking at the sky, he thought about the time he spent in this world. In the light of the full moon, he said out loud that a whole 140 years had passed since he got here. 140 years since it all began, since that car ride, the accident, and the fact that he was ready to see the end of this world for the sake of his family. But now he couldn't even remember their faces. If heaven did not exist for him, then this world became hell, and life became hellish day after day. Only Kyle was not going to indulge in thoughts and sad thoughts about the past for a long time, because he remained alive in this strange world. Suddenly his peace was disturbed by a new yellow board with new information. The first tablet said that his external and internal levels were equal to 50, and these were the maximum to achieve, and therefore he was congratulated on this achievement. The second sign announced that Kyle had fulfilled the unlocking conditions, and in particular, the last level heavenly emergence had been unlocked. But the most unexpected thing was the last sign, which announced that Kyle would be returned to Earth. The guy had no words to express his emotions, except for the question of whether the return would happen right now. New bursts of hysterical laughter were his first reaction, after which he admitted that he had already given up, which means that having received such permission to return, he must look pathetic. But the next thought made him come to his senses and fill him with anger and madness, because such a proposal could be an attempt to insult him. Kyle reached the maximum level, and having released his power, he asked the void if he could be considered a god, although it was a strange question on his part. He also believed that to become a god he must abandon all worldly desires. But remembering his family, his emotions always ran high, and he tried to understand if he had ever felt this way in his life. Seeing a sign asking if he wanted to return to the original world, Kyle understood that his family had probably already died, because many years had passed, and he only wanted to return home because of them. But now he only wanted one thing: find the creature that brought him to this point, and take revenge on him. A huge desire for revenge and death for the one who was to blame for Kyle being here filled the guy. It didn't matter to him who was involved or where he was. Kyle swore that he would definitely kill the person responsible for his presence in an alien world. All the guy's strength fell to the ground in one big avalanche. It was such a powerful release of magical energy that it could be seen from a great distance around. After all, the immortal Sword Emperor Kyle was finally ready to leave this world. He stayed in the world for 140 years, raising his level and developing his abilities, so that in an instant he could turn into a simple stream of information and be transported back to Earth, to his home world. On the day of Kyle's car accident with his parents in 2011, another event occurred. The blonde girl, dressed in the robes of a goddess and also accompanied by movement disturbances, knew more about this day than Kyle. After all, on that day a portal opened, and this day was supposed to bring horror that would threaten everyone very soon, and the goddess will do everything possible to ensure that humanity develops to withstand future threats, to withstand the horror that open portals filled with many red eyes will entail, red eyes of huge monsters, because the goddess believes that people should not waste the blessing in vain. At this time, somewhere in another corner of the parallel world, someone's triumphant voice was heard in the silence. The chained man was glad that someone else's journey had finally begun, because he had waited so long for what happened, and he knew Kyle. In the real world it was already 2025, and in Korea, in the dungeon of the Red Wolf, a girl used magic to shoot from a bow. She shot at the huge red mutant wolves that were chasing the guy in the wasteland. The wolves were huge, had 4 eyes and huge fangs and were intent on killing anyone in their path. But then the girl fired another arrow filled with blue glowing power using her archer skill power arrow, and instead of defeating one wolf, the arrow filled with a spell struck many of the creatures chasing the boy at once, allowing him to survive. The girl masterfully used her skills to deal with monsters, and it was Kyle's sister, Becca, the leader of one of the groups of people fighting monsters. She jumped from the hill to her rescued comrade, saying that it was not too late and they could get out. While the rescued guy praised her skills, the guy was so distracted, forgetting about safety, and a huge wolf attacked him from behind, fatally biting him. Becca turned around at the cry, amazed that there were more wolves. The rescued man fell to the ground, quickly losing strength and life. The girl could only watch as a huge pack of red wolves killed every person in her group before her eyes. She realistically assessed the situation, realizing that there were too many monsters and they were not going to go anywhere. While her mana was slowly running out. She, too, could die if everything continues at the same pace, but then she saw someone who, as soon as she ran out into the clearing, immediately turned around and rushed into the forest. This was a young guy who clearly had no intention of helping his teammates, and was going to save himself. Becca screamed his name, calling him Gray, hoping that he would come to his senses, but her attempts were in vain, but she attracted the attention of the wolves, who immediately began to approach her. The girl tried to cast magic on the arrow, but her mana spread too slowly to be used quickly, and the situation was approaching a catastrophic failure point. Gray, meanwhile, with hysterical thoughts, ran away from the clearing as best he could, realizing that he was too reckless. Seeing his teammates being overtaken by wolves, he mentally called them insects, thinking that he should not have been part of their group, and if he lingered, he would suffer the same pitiful fate. He saw a portal ahead, hoping that he could escape as he had to. Becca was still able to fill her bow with power and release an arrow engulfed in blue flames. She stuck into the ground right in front of Gray's feet, not allowing him to run further. The girl immediately found herself behind him, turning to the disoriented guy. She was completely engulfed in a blue flame of anger, calling Gray a damn dog and asking where he was going. The guy tried to look surprised, saying that he was glad that she, their leader, survived, and addressed her as Madam, while he began to make excuses that she misunderstood the situation, and they should all calm down. Becca, not listening to his chatter, simply grabbed the guy by the collar of his clothes. She was angry and repeated that she had already told Gray that the battlefield was dangerous. Becca was very angry, blaming Gray for being a weak coward who ran away in the face of danger, and their entire team died because of him. Gray just clenched his teeth in anger, openly saying that this is so, but he is not going to die here. At the same time, the guy pushed Becky's hand, holding him away, asking what if he's a coward, because he doesn't have to sacrifice his life. Becca, not too shocked by his confession, laughed, saying that he was right. Turning away and getting ready to leave him alone, she told herself that she shouldn't have expected more from Gray, because the guy was trash, and now he should have returned to his father so that he could console the winner and pat him on the head. Only now she doubted whether such a handsome father could turn a blind eye to his son's escape, and offered to see what would happen to the Dawn organization, of which his father was the head. Becky's blackmail worked, causing Gray to become very angry. The girl was about to go in the other direction when the guy called out to her. Gray was not going to let her go so easily, because now she could ruin his reputation with her knowledge of his meanness. He activated the Rockbreaker fighter skill, concentrating his mana into red power to strike. The charge of magic hit Becca, who was not expecting this, right in the chest. The force of his attack was so great that it threw her several meters away, causing her to drop her bow. With a cry of pain, Becca flew to a distant tree, hitting the trunk hard. Gray froze next to him, enjoying his victory over his defeated opponent. The angry guy grabbed her by the hair, angrily calling her names and pressuring her that no one needed her, because she didn't even have relatives. Approaching her face, the smug Gray mocked the girl, saying that although she was strong and famous, she could not even imagine what would happen to her in his hands. The embittered coward was going to denigrate her by glorifying her, but in a bad way with the help of his words. He intended to tell everyone that the leader Becca was the one who failed everyone and led to their death, and as a result of the raid into the dungeons, her entire group died due to her fault. Gray again concentrated the mana in his fist, confirming with the girl that his story was quite plausible. Becca did not have enough strength and energy to respond to the traitor. Gray raised his hand to strike her, so that with the last words that leader Becca did a good job, he could finish her off. Lightning bolts of blue magic illuminated everything around with a loud roar and split the skies, striking the ground behind the shocked Gray, distracting him and preventing him from finishing off Becca. In the swirl of dust and wind, a familiar dark silhouette appeared at the sight of the blue energy lightning strike. It was Kyle, finally transported to his home world. The guy looked exactly the same as he had in Mirim, with long hair, loose clothes and no trace of the age he had spent there. The 2 signs in front of his eyes announced that he had reached the maximum outer and inner levels of 50th, and that he had returned to Earth. Kyle slowly realized what had happened, beginning to rejoice that he was finally back. He began to laugh hysterically again, thinking that returning to Earth was a reward for reaching the maximum level. It was not serious, as if everything that happened to him was some kind of joke. But despite such a joyful event, Kyle did not forget about his desire to kill the one responsible for his disappearance. His desire for revenge was as strong as when he first thought about it. Gray, not understanding who was in front of him, called Kyle sick and said that he was talking to himself. Gray was uncomfortable with the fact that someone suddenly appeared from the thunder and screamed murder, and if the stranger could teleport, he must have been a magician. The traitor brazenly tried to address Kyle, ordering him to tell him where they were now. But Kyle ignored him, simply walking past him like he was an unimportant bug. Gray was starting to get angry that the stranger was ignoring him, while Kyle noticed the girl was unconscious. Kyle clarified whether Gray had a duel to the death with her, since she was dying. Gray didn't like this, since now there was one more extra witness. As Kyle bent over the girl, the traitor realized his mistake. Gray realized that he had made the wrong choice again, because the stranger could see what happened to Becca, which means he couldn't just let him go, and it would be better to get rid of him. The traitor tried to understand what the stranger was doing, but he was too afraid that he would understand what happened or find out the truth, so he again activated his power, saturating his fist with red magic, and he did not care what the stranger did, since he should have simply been eliminated, as another obstacle. Gray called out to the stranger, but Kyle was busy examining the girl in front of him, including experiencing shock, as he recognized her necklace. Kyle gently touched the girl's cheek, peering into her exhausted face. During this time, Gray lied that he and Becca were enjoying a duel to the death, and pretended to lie that he wanted the gods to return the girl. Only the traitor did not experience these feelings, but only distracted the stranger with conversation in order to reduce the distance. After all, he had already concentrated enough power to attack Kyle from behind, shouting that he would follow the girl to his death. Kyle's blue magical power gathered around him at that very second. Strong and energetic streams of blue magic stopped Gray. Kyle had too much control over the power that was now around them, blocking them from the outside world and suppressing everything around them, and the stranger's aura was frightening and deadly. Gray did not expect such strength from a nondescript opponent. Kyle was too powerful and angry, and his unbridled power swirled the air around the guy hovering above the ground. Gray could only watch everything around him in fear and amazement. Kyle, using his full power so that even his eyes glowed blue, asked if Gray knew who he was. Concentrating his forces into stable blue lightning, Kyle called Gray a youth, ordering him to say his name, but Gray didn't know him, so Kyle introduced himself, saying that he was the Immortal Sword Emperor. He said his name Kyle, and his strength was so great that his eyes glowed with blue energy. The angry magician loomed over the frightened guy, telling him that even if he called his name, it would not help him. From the finger that Kyle touched the traitor's forehead, a small ball of bright neon blue light was released. It was a charge of energy, which in the next moment destroyed everything in its path with a large and powerful beam, burning through space many meters ahead, sparing neither stones nor trees. And from the outside it was clear that the energy explosion generated by the small ball had reached colossal proportions, leaving its mark for many meters around. When the energy of the blow was exhausted, only a charred place remained from Gray's head, as well as behind it along the trajectory of the blow. It was very easy for Kyle to remember his name, because he was in his home world. He stood behind the still unconscious girl, coming to his senses. Turning around in blood and with a half-crazed smile, Kyle told her, addressing Becca by name, that her older brother had returned. Becca remembered her childhood on that fateful day in 2011, when her parents, not for the first time, told the upset girl that it was time for them to leave and they could not stay where she wanted, and if Becca really wanted, she could stay in alone. Her parents went to the car, saying that it was already getting dark, and she should still go with them. Only her brother, Kyle, remained nearby, asking if she really liked the amusement park that much. He smiled because he was worried about her, advising that if Becca still decided to stay in the park, then their parents could have big problems. Becca didn't want to agree with him, only hugging the bear closer to her. She wanted to stay at the amusement park, not because it was good, but because if she went home, she didn't know when she would see her brother next, since her mother said that Kyle wouldn't come to them that often, because then school began. Kyle touched his sister's hair, calling her name to get her attention. He asked if Becca knew how much Kyle loved her, and then followed up by saying that even after school, he would come and visit her. Becca listened with tears in her eyes to these words, and to the fact that Kyle suggested that next time they also go for a walk to this park to spend time together. She would never refuse Kyle, so she immediately collected herself and answered with consent and a bright smile. Therefore, when Kai again asked if everything was okay and if she was ready to go home, Becca agreed and asked her brother to carry her to the car on his back to enjoy these moments fully, and Kyle replied that at least this time he would carry her. Every time he won't be able to do that, because Becca is heavy, which caused his sister to feign indignation, and she asked him to carry her every day. These were the last bright moments of her memories before the car accident that happened on the highway that same day. Becca blamed herself for the accident, thinking that everything happened because of her stubbornness and desire to take a walk in the park, because their parents died in that accident. And when Becca came to her senses in the wrecked car and called for her brother, she received no answer. The place where Kyle sat and had his seatbelt on was empty because her brother had disappeared. In the real world, not the girl's memories, Kyle used his power to heal her. Becca came to her senses with a scream, opening her eyes and taking a deep breath. She immediately tried to get up, but was in pain, while Kyle told her that he had healed her with spiritual power, but since the wound was deep, she would not be able to move painlessly right away. The girl looked at the guy with distrust and without a grain of recognition, asking who he was, to which Kyle replied with a short pause that he thought she recognized him. The guy pulled his hand towards her pendant, which she immediately grabbed and covered with her hand, while the stranger told her that he was happy to see her again, and that he had grown so much and had become much heavier since their last meeting. But this didn't stop Kyle, and he took Becca's hand with a smile, saying that he had probably changed too. Becca was shocked at how much the stranger reminded her of him, her older brother from the bright memories of the past and the day of that terrible accident. After all, it was Kyle who gave her that pendant with a photo of their family, and said that even if he wasn't there, she should never give up and should always be strong. Becca swallowed her words, realizing who was standing in front of her. She began to cry with happiness, because her brother was such an idiot, suddenly disappeared, and now appeared. Kyle hugged his sobbing sister, holding her soothingly to him, saying that he understood how hard it was for her. But Becca came to her senses, pushing her brother away with a sharp movement and taking a fighting stance, as she remembered that Gray was supposed to be somewhere nearby. Kyle turned serenely towards the crater where the body lay, asking if his sister was talking about this guy who tried to kill her. Becca was shocked to see both the crater and the corpse inside it. The body showed no signs of life and did not move. Becca asked Kyle why he killed Gray, and her brother, confirming the traitor's death, asked what was wrong with this situation. The girl abruptly grabbed his hand, pulling him in her direction. She said in fear that they needed to escape from here as soon as possible. Becca lived in one of the high-rise buildings in an ordinary city, in their previous apartment, while the girl sat on the sofa, Her brother looked around, making sure that over the past years the house had remained in the same condition as it was. Becca, meanwhile, was pondering the situation, telling her brother that they were in for a big problem, as Director Kong was due to arrive soon. Kyle didn't know who it was. He asked his sister, and she explained that this was the director of the Dawn Guild, and also Gray's father, and since he was a local mafia, he was known for his cruelty and ferocity. Director Kong was one of the 11 high-ranking hunters in Korea. Becca looked at her watch, noticing that it had been a long time since she was unconscious, and most likely Director Kong had already been informed of her son's death. She said out loud that she was the only one who survived that raid, and that means she would definitely be suspected of something. Kyle couldn't understand why this could cause so much trouble. The guy, with slight arrogance, clarified, since this brings so many problems, why isn't it easier for him and his sister to simply get rid of this group by killing their leader? Becca immediately brought Kyle down from heaven to earth, pulling him by the cheeks in a family-like manner, and not allowing him to pompously say that he was the immortal Sword Emperor. Although the girl agreed that her brother's words made sense, she noticed that Mr. Kong had a level above 50, and also a rather high position. And then Becca flared up, screaming at her brother for calling himself the immortal Sword Emperor, indignantly. Who even says that? What does it mean? And if her brother has been gone for 14 years, and now he's saying something like that, is that all? It's good with him. Kyle was only surprised that she said it so directly, while the girl complained that she did not know what to do, because neither her father and mother nor brother were nearby, and asked if Kyle understood how much it was hard. She continued speaking, stopping at the fact that Kyle had appeared so unexpectedly when the guy himself froze in front of their family portrait. He upsetly clarified that her words meant that her parents had already died. Kyle, with some confusion, asked his sister if he had said something strange or maybe his tone was too rude, while the girl tried to understand what he meant. Reluctantly, the guy explained that he was in a place called Murim, but the reason why he was there was not important for the conversation. Kyle turned to his sister, asking her to tell him everything that happened while he was gone. He was interested in who the hunters were, what kind of guilds appeared, and whether in this world there was the concept of LeveL that she mentioned. Becca stopped him, asking him to wait, since everything was complicated enough to explain everything, and her head was threatening to explode from so many events. She stood up, preparing to leave, saying goodbye that she would tell everything later, since she had one urgent matter and she needed to go away. Kyle asked where she was going, and Becca, showing her car keys, said that she would go to Dawn, asking Kyle to stay here and not do anything. Kyle walked away, opening the door and deciding to wait for her in his old room, where everything was left untouched, as if he had been in it yesterday. The guy remembered his sister's indignant reaction to his words, realizing that he had traveled alone for a long time and reached the top. And now he had to become an older brother again, and it was so long ago that he barely remembered anything. Kyle was determined, remembering what his sister had said, including about Mr. Khan, and the guy decided that he should find out more about him. And then the sounds of impacts shook the front door, disturbing Kyle's peace. Several strangers were near the apartment with bad intentions. One of them used a magical purple seal, channeling his power through it. He grinned bloodthirstily, clearly planning a crime. So these three, using the seal and purple power, broke down the door to Becky's house. Kyle saw them from the hallway, hearing the question of where his sister was. The girl's older brother guessed who the guys were who smashed the door to their family's house. It was the director of the group, Dawn Kan, who was looking for Becca. At that time, the girl in her car reached the business center, where the second largest guild headquarters in Korea was located, the Dawn Guild. Becca was worried that she had simply walked away, leaving Kyle alone in the apartment. She hoped that Director Kong did not have time to do anything, and that he could grab her as soon as the girl entered the building. Wondering who to ask for help, Becca was standing by her car when another girl called her name. It was Alice Libora, deputy head of the Dawn Guild, who was asking Becca what she was doing here. Becca asked the girl where the head of their guild was, having learned from her that Mr. Khan had gone somewhere with the head of the raid, John. Alice asked the drooping Becky what had happened to her. Becca looked thoughtfully and decisively at the deputy head of the Dawn Guild, mentally reflecting on her position and status. Alice Libora was one of the 4 strongest hunters, and although everyone around her knew her strength, few understood it. Becca didn't think about it for long, because her situation was hopeless, and there was no one else to turn to for help. So she clenched her hands into fists tighter, preparing to tell the girl opposite the whole truth. At this time, 3 members of the Dawn Guild froze on the threshold of Becky and Kyle's house. Kyle was angry that the intruders had come without warning. He asked if the most impressive thug among those who came was that same Can, and whether his parents really didn't teach him to knock on doors and not break them, to which one of the guild mockingly clarified that maybe they should go out and then knock politely for him to open, indignant that they didn't come here for a housewarming party. Here, the same impudent guy asked Becky's brother who he was, and Can left the guy, pulling him back and forcing him to stop the squabble. The guild leader said that everything is not important, and he only cares about where Becca is now. Kyle was not going to make the situation easier for them by asking if they were really looking for Becca or the one who killed Gray. And if the latter, then it was he who killed Kong's son, which plunged the head of the guild into an angry shock. Mr. Kong screamed in frustration and anger as he released his strong red magical energy into the world around him. But this did not bother Kyle, and the guy said that since his title from Mirim sounds so strange in this world, then he should be called Mr. Kyle Benet, after the name of his family. And since everyone understood everything, then they can start, and activated your blue magical energy, concentrating it in your hands. The guy allowed Khan to start because he wanted to see his skills, and the man concentrated all his power into the hammer to deal heavy damage to the daring guy. They prepared for a clash, each using their accumulated energy, which for Khan was red and concentrated in a hammer that transformed into a sword, and for Kyle was blue and looked like lightning around his hand. Meanwhile, Alice, having heard from Becky the story of what happened during the raid, enthusiastically said that she wanted to see the girl's brother, and they should hurry. A fight began in the Benet house, and a sharp swing of red energy left a large noticeable mark in space. With his blow, Khan unleashed the full power of his power on Kyle, who was easily able to dodge the blow. The guy watched with interest that there were also mysterious forces in the Tao, and in this case they were similar to the spirit of the sword, or its energy. Only Kyle saw that the source of these powers was different. He wondered if this was the power of the hunters that his sister Becca spoke about. The guy remembered how at the moment when he returned to this world, Gray, who attacked him, used the same strange power. Kyle thought it was funny and unusual, and he told himself that it was worth studying. Mr. Ken, meanwhile, overwhelmed with anger and despair, was preparing for a new blow, concentrating all his power in the sword. He swung his sword left and right, galloping towards his opponent, and using his warrior skill called sequential attack. This allowed him to quickly and presumably unexpectedly approach Kyle. The guy just stood still and didn't move, not at all frightened by what was happening and not paying attention to the red flashes of magic. Khan hit him with a backhand with concentrated force, intending to cut him in half, but nothing happened. The red magical energy did not cause any harm to Kyle, slowly dissipating near him. The guy told Ken, embittered and amazed at the futility of his blow, that this was enough, and Kyle saw everything in order to understand what the director of the Dawn Guild was capable of with his amazing and incomprehensible power. It turned out that the guy managed to block all of Khan's powerful attacks with his bare hands, and they didn't even push him away. The guy was so strong. Kyle, with his blue eyes glowing from the magic he was using, ominously asked Mr. Ken whether there were really 10 people in Korea as strong as him. At this time, Mr. Ken's assistants became more active, planning to attack Kyle from both sides, while he blocked their boss's sword with his hand. They tried to unleash their blows on Kyle at the same time, but were met with a blue glow that countered their blows. The guy waved them away as if they were annoying flies, saying that they were just bothering him, when another of the henchmen prepared fire seals to attack Kyle. The guy only had time to feel the heat from the fire aimed at him. Several seals hit him directly in the back, exploding dangerously close in an attempt to damage and destroy him. Because the owner of these seals, one of the minions of the guild leader, used a magician's skill called fireballs. Director Kong and the others watched as the flames exploded right next to Kyle, and one of the henchmen exclaimed triumphantly that they had succeeded. Several more guild henchmen with swords attacked Kyle's figure blazing with magical fire, intending to pierce him through. Only now Becky's brother, still engulfed in magical orange flames, again stopped the blade of the blade aimed at him with his bare hands, in addition reporting that the attackers had exceeded all his expectations. True, with the next phrase he doubted his words in anger, also easily breaking the attacker's sword, as if it were made of plastic. The eyes of the guild minion opened in horror, because he did not expect this. Kyle activated his power again, which immediately engulfed his body in blue magical fire, dispelling the orange flames and throwing back the attackers. The minions could not understand why he was so strong and what he was doing. Kyle simply shook off his clothes, as if he was shaking off not the consequences of someone else's attack, but light dirt. He glanced briefly at the calendar, finding confirmation of his sister's words that he had been gone only 14 years, although he had been in Murim much longer. But now, when he assessed the abilities of the minions of the Dawn Guild who attacked him, he realized that their level was quite good, but the abilities were similar to innate talents that had been developed over 1,000 years. And looking at the head of the guild, Kyle did not understand how people were able to overtake Murim in 14 years. And such as the head of the guild and his minions could only be found a couple of people in each generation, which was absurd and did not fit in with reality. Kyle also remembered that he himself was a similar inconsistency, because in Murim he had a low cultivation level, but he was much stronger than many. Therefore, he was able to defeat a huge number of opponents when he fought in Murim. And the reason was that the hierarchy of Murim's power did not affect him, and the power of those around him was just words. Then he took advantage of the idea of rebuilding his abilities and rising to the very pinnacle of power. So Kyle defeated everyone in Murim who was at least a little interesting or dangerous to him. Alice and Becca hurried across the bridge to Benet's apartment. Becca herself, while driving the car, could not believe that the deputy head of a large guild wanted to see her brother. The girl glanced furtively at Alice, wondering why such an influential girl as Lebora needed her unremarkable brother. Besides, the difficult question remained whether Alice was a friend or an enemy for them. Then, in the parking lot, Alice asked Becky for permission to meet with her brother, Kyle Bennett, promising that in return she would report the incident with Gray as an accident. Lebora also promised that she would talk to the guild director, and Becca thought that this was an excellent and generous offer that she should not refuse. And now, when Becca takes Mrs. Lebora to her home, she only thinks about whether Alice is her brother's enemy or not, and does not understand why the girl in her car is silent. As if reading her thoughts, Alice Lebora took the words, reminding her that Becca had said that her brother, Kyle, had been missing, and asking how many years, to be exact, he had been missing. Becky's words, confirming her brother's absence, struck Alice with their timing, because Kyle disappeared in 2011 and had been missing for 14 years. It seems that Alice perfectly understood where Becky's brother was, since, like Kyle himself, she translated 14 years into 140 years, which actually passed in Murim, and Lebora was even mentally afraid to imagine how strong the guy would be. Therefore, the deputy head of the Dawn Guild asked another question, asking Becca what kind of person her brother was, to which the girl hesitantly replied that he was sweet and kind, remembering his former self. Becca was pleased to talk about her brother, and she also noted that he was smart, and Alice asked if he studied, meaning higher educational institutions. Sister Kayla named the university where her brother studied, and remembered that he also helped her with her homework, and Alice was surprised by the name, because it was difficult to get there, noting that the girl's brother probably studied very well. Becca just grinned at this, reporting that he was just very persistent, explaining that once Kyle took on something, he did it to the end, and did not stop until he reached the end. At this time, in the Bennett family's apartment, Kyle pointed his finger at another henchman of the head of the Dawn Guild, standing a short distance away. Becca's brother, completely ignoring the fierce attacking swordsman from behind, asked the guy he pointed his finger at to use his strange aura again, because he had never encountered such power in Murim. Having repelled the swordsman's refusal from behind with one right hand, Kyle threateningly asked not to interfere with him, since he was not interested in this attacker. The guy Kyle pointed out earlier had no choice but to activate his blue circular rune diagrams, from which ice crystals immediately appeared, which he directed at the stranger. Kyle repelled them with a simple shield, so that not a single shard of ice reached the target, and the guy himself commented that he liked the coldness of the henchmen who attacked him, and in Murim this can only be found in the Ice Palace in the North Sea. Remembering the ice dragon, Kyle brought his hand to his face with the help of magic, causing fine frost to appear around his palm. A moment later, he turned this frost into huge ice dragons, which were summoned to attack the guild's minion who attacked him with ice crystals. The short-sighted Ice Lord was immediately frozen by the ice dragons, unable to withstand Kyle's strength. The henchman with the shield only managed to shout for help in an attempt to escape, but Kyle noticed his escape as soon as he turned towards the sound. It turns out that the henchman could not leave the apartment after colliding with the bluish magical barrier created by Kyle, and no blows of the fist or appeals to the leader could help him. A bright blue beam pierced the head of this henchman with a shield, killing him on the spot. Khan called out to the shield keeper who had fallen to the ground, while Kyle noticed that the warrior with the shield should stand in the vanguard and stop the enemy's attacks, and this one cowardly ran away, showing his back. Kyle found himself behind Guild Director Khan, announcing that it was his turn. With a grin, he clarified to the man that he did not expect this, and asked if everyone here was so cowardly. At this time, the man tried to feverishly figure out who was in front of him, and why such a young guy possessed both ice magic and protection, and could emit a strange beam from his fingers, not understanding what it was, and doubting whether it was magic, and not understanding how a mage can stop his attacks. Khan noticed that if he paid attention to the world around him, despite the large scale of their battle, absolutely nothing in the house was damaged. Wondering if this was an accident, Khan called Kyle a bastard, asking what he did magically to this place, and if he was preparing for their arrival. Kyle answered the man with a grin that he simply used the soul of his sword and covered the entire space around with it, because he had not been home for a very long time, and he could not allow the guild members to destroy everything around him. The guy remembered the past, realizing that he could not explain it in more detail, since it was difficult, but he explained that as soon as the intruders entered this house, they immediately found themselves in a world controlled by Kyle. The Dawn Guild president became angry at this response, activating his power again and preparing to attack Kyle, believing him to be a monster. The man did not intend to die in this place, so he gained enough strength to activate the Berserk skill. He used up most of the red magical power swirling around him and used his next skill called Fury. Kyle, as always, calmly watched what was happening, generally agreeing that for some he could be a monster, but the red flashes of someone else's magic did not frighten him at all, and he only thought out loud that the aura around Ken had increased, and so far Kyle didn't know what the man was going to do next. The guild master readied his magic-filled sword once again to attack Kyle in rage mode. He used the same technique, throwing a lot of hard and fast punches in an attempt to hit the guy, but Kyle had no problem dodging it, as if he could see all the movements in advance. Bart Becky replied that this did not make Khan any better, but on the contrary, as if he had lost his mind and become crazier. Kyle directed his power into a sword lying on the floor, broken at the end, filling it with blue magical energy, and lifting it from its place, calling to him. He no longer had any desire to stand on ceremony with the guild master who disturbed his peace, so he simply prepared for the blow, adding more of his strength to the sword. One precise swing of the blade was enough for Kyle to hit the man, fatally cutting his body. The guy himself simply passed his opponent without receiving a single scratch. All Khan had time to do was try to call Kyle a monster again, to which Becky's brother said that he should know his place. Turning around covered in blood, he noticed that Ken was simply nothing in front of the immortal sword emperor that was Kyle. Soon Becca brought Alice into her apartment, inviting her to come in and pass, but was surprised that the front door was open, looking inside in shock. Her brother was diligently wiping someone's blood off the floor, and nearby bodies were piled on top of each other, and in response to his sister's indignant question about what happened and why the front door was open, he only said that she was late. Wringing out the blood-stained rag, Kyle simply said that his sister shouldn't be surprised, because these were the guests he brought to their housewarming party. But Becca did not understand anything, indignantly clarifying what kind of housewarming party it was, and how it could turn into a bloodbath. The sister insisted that she had just arrived, and here it was, insisting that her brother explain himself, but Kyle only replied that he liked his sister's determined look, and in New Rhyme's world she would have become much stronger. Alice casually noticed that there seemed to be fun in this apartment, and Kyle only noticed her, mentally asking who she was. After all, he felt how the heavenly harmony of pure art resonated next to her. Alice, in turn, peered at Kyle, wondering who he really was. She looked at the guy smugly, mentally noting that apparently he thought that he was the only one who was in Nirim, and that it was a great surprise for him to meet someone who could be aware of the place where he had been missing for 14 years. On a sunny day, the world around the Bennett house was quiet and calm. Becca slept peacefully in her bed, undisturbed by anything. Suddenly the girl woke up, sweating from one frightening thought. She abruptly rose from the bed and headed deeper into the apartment to make sure that she was just having a nightmare. Stopping at the threshold of one of the rooms, she hesitantly called out to her brother, realizing that she could not find him. Standing in the rays of the morning sun, Kyle, already with a short haircut and in clothes familiar to this world, noted in surprise that Becca got up very early. The girl turned around, not expecting to find him at the window. Kyle smiled carefreely as he stood by the open window, with a little concern, asking his sister if she thought he had disappeared again. Becca was glad that she wasn't imagining everything and that her brother was really next to her now, so she asked why he didn't sleep longer. The sound of an incoming message caused Kyle to break away, asking her sister to pause the conversation, and Becca agreed. Kyle read the text carefully, taking the message seriously. It was a message about an important call, and the guy went into another room to answer, leaving Becca alone. The girl from the window saw him leaving the house, worried that a week had passed since his return, and everything seemed unreal to her. That meeting between the deputy head of the Dawn Guild, Alice Libora, and Becky's brother passed without much result, because they didn't talk about anything, and the only thing Alice said then was the promise of a new meeting. It was also strange that after some time people from the Dawn Guild arrived and took the bodies of Director Kan and his subordinates. A news report the next day informed the townspeople of Gray's death and Director Khan's resignation, and numerous news articles were filled with speculation about the motives behind Director Khan's abrupt choice. Alice Libora kept her promises and the Bennett family was not harmed. Becca, watching from the window as her brother talked to the driver of the car that had just arrived, remembered that she, as the only survivor of the Red Wolf's dungeon, was given a long vacation. The girl knew that at the time of the call, Alice Libora was talking with her brother and invited him to her place, so she wondered what the deputy head of the Dawn Guild wanted from Kyle. Looking at Kyle leaving, Becca quietly said that he should return unharmed after the meeting with Libora. Alice sat alone at a table in an authentic Chinese-style cafe. She was enjoying tea from a small light bowl when a guest disturbed her, stating that she had so nothing to do at the moment. It was Kyle, who had come at the girl's invitation, and clarified that their small family with Becca had been under 24-hour surveillance since the moment he met Libora, and wondered what could be interesting about that. Alice smiled innocently, pretending to be embarrassed that her surveillance had been discovered, and said that it was for the safety of their family. But Kyle, sitting down at the table opposite her, waved it off, saying that this situation could be left out. Kyle took a sip of tea from the bowl, immediately recognizing the variety. Libora was glad that the guy recognized the type of tea, which was called Qishan's Silver Needle, and she shared that she often goes to this particular tea shop to taste this rare tea. Alice didn't intend to drag out the small talk for long, getting straight to the point and asking Kyle for a story about her arrival in Murim. Kyle replied with a smile that the meeting with Murim left him with bad memories and he didn't like it too much, so he invited the girl to be the first to tell about her experience. She put the bowl back in the saucer, saying that at the moment there were only 3 repatriates, those who returned from Murim, 2 of which were her and Kyle himself. The third person to return from Murim would be the head of the Twilight Guild, Max Paxwell. The Dusk Guild was as influential and strong as the Dawn Guild and had the same huge number of hunters, but at the moment both guilds had differences and did not get along with each other. At the same time, Elisa said that she and Maxim once compared their stories of being in Murim and found out something in common. They disappeared together in 2011 and both ended up in an unfamiliar cave. Each one had a mysterious treasure on one side called the Heavenly Harmony of Pure Art, which was a glitch book engulfed in purple magical fire, and on the other side of the cave there was an exit to a world called Murim. Alice reported that it was a similar experience between her and Max and asked if Kyle had the same experience. The guy remembered how, upon leaving the cave, 2 signs appeared in front of him, asking if he wanted to return to the original world. And if his desire to return is great, then he needs to see the end of this world. Kyle confirmed that in his case everything was the same, and Alice continued that they were able to return to the ordinary world only a few years later, and when they returned, here, in their home world, the era of hunters and dungeons began. And about Murim, in which they spent some time, she never found anything, noticing that the changes in their real world were connected specifically with Murim. Alice asked the guy if he knew when the conditions of the hunters and dungeons appeared, and Kyle replied that it was 14 years ago, after the revelation of the goddess. It was that girl in light robes who was worried about the fate of this world. Alice confirmed that this was true, and after the goddess's revelation, dungeons, monsters and hunters suddenly appeared, and with them classes and skills. Altogether it became very reminiscent of RPG games. The girl finished her story, asking whether Kyle had any questions, and he clarified how exactly he and Max returned to Earth, whether they reached the end, to which Alice easily replied that they returned as soon as they died there. She asked if Kyle had returned back like that, and seeing his depressed and upset state, she asked what happened and maybe she said something wrong. The cup in Kyle's hands cracked with the realization that there was no need for him to disappear in Nurem for so long, and he could have just left. Outwardly the guy was smiling, but inside he was raging with a whole storm of negative emotions from the realization that he could just end up back. Mentally, the guy asked the goddess if she sent him there, while hundreds of notice signs were in front of the face of the chained stranger, and Kyle continued to ask why all this. The stranger in chains smiled ominously, while Becky's brother continued to lament that his reward for 140 years in Nurem was simply reaching the maximum level for which he was sent to Earth, and Kyle believed that this was a small reward and he worthy of being awarded more. Angered by such realizations, Kyle was loudly indignant that the reward should have been at least an answer to his question, because he achieved everything with sweat and blood, and the goddess did not even give him answers. Alice, whom Kyle was looking at that moment, looked at the guy in fear and confusion. The guy quickly switched gears and asked why the girl invited him and what she wanted from him. Taken by surprise by such a sudden change in her guest's mood, she looked away, asking if he would like to take a walk. Alice began by calling not only the guild president Max Paxville and his entire Twilight Guild an enemy to Dawn, saying that they already had a tense relationship with them, and frequent conflicts day after day, and now, after the death of the director, Kana will only get worse. Since Kyle was the one who killed Mr. Khan, who was one of the main forces of the Dawn, he must take responsibility. Alice invited Kyle to join Dawn and promised to give him a high position, fame and fortune, and she was sure that he should not refuse such a good offer. Kyle looked away, noting that it was difficult for him to ignore the remark of his sister's boss. At the same time, when the guy looked directly at Alice, he said that despite the circumstances, he still refused her. Turning around, he was about to leave when the girl stopped him by asking why he was refusing, and Kyle had to explain that he was going to be on his own. He took a few steps, turning around to explain his answer. Kyle smiled, clarifying whether she would agree to submit to someone weaker than herself, hinting that his strength was higher than the entire Dawn Guild. Alice looked with disbelief at the smug boy in front of her, assessing his capabilities. It didn't take her long to take her next step, inviting them to test which of them was weak. Kyle thoughtfully asked if Alice knew that 1 year in their world is equal to 10 years in Nurem, and once again said that he had been there for 140 years, putting pressure on the fact that this alone should be enough in their dispute. Alice reasonably noted that age is not proportional to skills and strength, and the guy agreed with her, adding that any person who lived in Nurem for 300 years would not become stronger than Kyle. Alice asked if the guy was sure of this, and activating her power, she created a small purple magic ball. Saying the order to open the barrier, she sent a stream of energy forward. He rushed across the grass towards Kyle, leaving a purple trail behind him. Having drawn the border across the clearing, the magic ball almost reached the guy. Freezing at the end of the clearing, the ball hovered several meters above the ground. A moment later, it flashed with a bright flash because Alice activated her origin skill called Shadow Play. Kyle was still assessing the effect of the spell, which outlined a limited space around them, noticing that some of his feelings had left him, and the space around him had become darker. He also estimated that the radius of action was 50 meters, and in Nurem it would have taken quite a bit of time to create such a shape and effort. Alice, watching with the guy how the ordinary world remained behind the canopy of the spell, explained that this was her origin skill. She said that what was happening could be considered the creation of a new space that imitated the real world, and from the outside it looked like they just disappeared. Alice, stepping forward, again noted that such a skill was called Blood Plum Blossom in Nurem, and she had never failed an assassination mission after using it. Kyle noted to himself with a grin that it was now clear why she could easily kill, and also clarified that their fight would now be comparable to a fight against water with tied hands. The girl, having activated first one and then the other sword with the help of her magic, which enveloped the weapon in bright crimson flashes, said that it was easy to get out of this space, and you just need to kill her. Swinging her blades, Alice looked frightening, adding that the second way to get out of the illusory world was the death of Kyle himself. Kyle took her words too lightly, noting that it was quite funny that she was trying to kill him, and noting that such a skill could be used for more than just locking. The girl did not have enough self-control to stand on ceremony with the guy, and she made a sharp lunge, trying to reach his neck with her blade. Approaching Kyle, Alice agreed with him, without stopping the attack. Only all the attacks and attempts to reach Kyle were unsuccessful, and the guy easily dodged, not allowing himself to be harmed. Alicia took a step back to swing for another strike. She used all her strength and skills to attack the enemy with lightning speed from many sides at once. But this was not a problem for the guy, and he easily repelled all her attacks with his hand. Kyle maintained an indifferent expression on his face, as if the girl's blows, even theoretically, could not cause him any significant harm. Alice took a few steps back in order to gather her strength and approach the enemy with a new attack. She crossed her blades to send a new stream of offensive magic towards Kyle. The guy had to jump away to avoid the blow, noting that he found it interesting that Alice was able to change the direction of the daggers with one hand, and this was a unique form of weapon. Kyle said that only the best assassin in Nirim, whose name was the Dark King, possessed such a technique, who had the special skill Moonlight of the Bloody Path, and Alice was surprised that Kyle recognized her at first sight. Becky's brother smiled, saying that he had already met with a boy who claimed to be her successor, but then Kyle himself was young. Finishing off the girl mentally, he reports that this is why he instantly killed him. Alice froze in shock at this news, not expecting such a denouement. Kyle stood aside, saying that he would give the girl 3 tries to use her skill from Mirim to try to get him, and if she could harm him, then he would agree to join Dawn. The guy invited her to start, and Alice grabbed her dagger more tightly. She began to concentrate mana around herself again, creating a dark red cloud of power, agreeing to start attacking. Kyle, observing not only Alice, but also his own feelings, noted that in Labora's world, which she created, it was as if feelings disappeared, as if there was nothing there, and he even slightly felt like a lost kitten in a huge hostile environment, wondering the question is whether this effect was due to her skill and strength. Meanwhile, smoke swirled in the dark red fog, creating whirlpools within which purple magical flashes were born, clearly posing a threat to Kyle in the future. The guy watched this with a relaxed smile, as if he had not seen anything new in such a technique. Meanwhile, magical clots soared upward, combining into a large whirlwind not only of air, but also of stones. For a few moments they hovered high on Kyle, and then, filled with magical energy, they gained strength and chose the direction to strike. In an instant, they all rushed down in an attack on the guy who jumped to the side, picking up speed and trying to inflict significant damage on him. Kyle extended his hand, quickly summoning his blue magical energy and concentrating it in one place. He fired numerous magical blasts to the sides, smashing all the projectiles flying at him with his blue energy fire. The guy jumped to the side, watching as his mana easily destroyed the hostile red flashes. He raised his hand in a defensive gesture, commenting on his opponent's attack as not bad. His extended arm acted as a shield for Alice's next attack, which Kyle easily calculated, parrying without the slightest loss to himself. Grinning, he informed the girl that she was quite far away, noting that this was her second attempt, causing the girl to be dissatisfied with his reaction. She jumped to the side to maneuver, noting that she knew about it. Having retreated a short distance for the next attack, Alice reported that in the world of Mirim there was the strongest man named Shaolin, and he lived there for 150 years. And since Kyle lived there for about the same amount of time, he was most likely comparable in strength to him. Kyle, who did not attach such pathos and significance to this, and even after Alice's words that most likely he was the strongest person in the world of Mirim, only nodded, disinterestedly agreeing, striking the girl with his indifference. Alice activated the streams of her energy, which immediately raised pillars of stones from the ground nearby, showing her power. The girl, surrounded by dark, bright streams of her energy, spoke out loud about her desire to kill Kyle, wondering what would happen next. Will she become the strongest among Mirim, at this time surrounding Kyle with streams of her powerful dark energy mixed with the stones. The guy, serenely watching what was happening around, grinned, saying that she was most likely right. He continued to watch as Alice lifted many large stones from the ground with the energy flows of her mana, concentrating small flows into one large one, and wondered if she would have enough strength and power so that she could actually kill him. The girl did not listen to him, fully concentrating on using her power, which filled everything around with magical cords, lifting everything up. Alice used all her strength by using an assassin's skill called Shadow Daggers. A large pillar of energy and stones formed behind her easily obeyed her when using the skill, and the girl, waving her arms crosswise, directed all the magical daggers towards her opponent in a deadly attack. Kyle deliberately stood in one place, watching as the magical energy entwined with the stones turned into deadly cords heading straight towards him. The guy used just one skill called Sword Soul to create a small beam of energy and protect himself. But its power was so great, the force of the explosion even from a small energy ball was colossal. This energy and strength was enough to instantly dispel all the dark red magical strands designed to kill him. Alice could only wonder at the strength and power of this guy. True, after the flash, which almost blinded her, a huge stone flew towards the girl, which she had not expected. She tried to move to evade, but realized that it was impossible. Something held her back, not allowing her to move even an inch from the site of the attack of the huge stone. Someone's hand swung with force to strike. Kyle stood between Alice and a huge stone with one blow of his fist, crushing the latter into 100 small pieces that flew in the opposite direction from the force of the blow, thereby saving her life. Alice looked fascinated at his hand, which was completely undamaged by the blow, and Kyle himself said with a smile that this was her third attempt, but if she wanted, they could continue. The girl, trembling from the horror of imminent death, answered with a short pause that no, she would not continue, admitting that she had lost. The pink curtain that separated their illusory world from the real one slowly dissipated. Alice promised Kyle that this would not happen again, and asked permission to ask one thing. The girl was slightly wounded, while Kayla didn't have a scratch, and she wanted to know what the guy had done, because for a moment it seemed to her that she was fighting an invincible creature whose capabilities went beyond the boundaries of this world. The guy slowly sank to the ground, crossing his legs to tell her in detail why this happened, starting with the fact that he assumed that this would happen if they fought in that illusory space, and that if an ordinary person were there, he would immediately killed, even if his strength was beyond the bounds. Alice listened in shock to the guy's words, surprised by what he said, because she was able to survive. She tightened her grip on her dagger, asking one simple question to find out just how strong Kyle was. He noted that the girl was very effective at combining her martial arts with skills. This was the answer. In addition, the guy noted that he would like to return to their previous conversation. While Alice was hiding her twin blades in her magic pocket, he said that he would still like to accept her previous proposals for cooperation, but on his own terms, which included financial support for Kyle and his family, as well as providing them with information, for which the guy himself will help the Dawn Guild. The only condition remained that he still did not intend to become a member of the guild, intending to maintain his status as an outsider. Kyle suggested that Alice evaluate this in the form of an alliance, since the guy did not want anyone to command him or help him. The girl, having listened to him thoughtfully, after a pause, replied that she agreed to his conditions, and asked him to promise one thing. Alice asked Kyle Beckett that besides the Dawn Guild, he should not support any other guild including Twilight. The guy got up from his seat with a smile, saying that she shouldn't even promise such a thing. Extending his hand to Alice, Kyle introduced himself once again, giving his title as the Immortal Sword Emperor, and saying that he would not betray his word. Mentally he added that in general this was part of his plans, since he was going to fight with the strongest of this world, and out loud he asked the girl to remove all the security and surveillance that she had placed on their family, saying that he tolerated them only because his sister's work, but now he doesn't know what could happen to them, hinting to the girl that she should understand what he is warning about. And Alice did not answer directly, once again reminding that she was not going to harm their family, and Kyle thanked her for understanding this situation, hoping that she would remove the surveillance voluntarily, meanwhile paying attention to the girl's injury. And the next moment the guy tore off part of the sleeve of his outer shirt. Kyle handed this piece of fabric to Alice with a request to forgive him, and she could only look at him blankly, clarifying what he meant. Becky's brother explained that he provoked the girl into her attacks with his talk about 3 attempts, saying that his true goal was to see her skill as one of the strongest people in this world. Therefore, he was embarrassed that she was injured as a result of the battle. Alice answered with a grin that, of course, she thanks him for his kind word, but there was nothing terrible about her wound, since thanks to his strength she was able to muster the determination to kill Kyle, to which the guy embarrassedly noted that the girl herself had been aiming at him from the very beginning vital organs. Meanwhile, Kyle wanted to ask about one more thing, clarifying why in the world of Nurim Alice chose the path of a killer. The girl just grinned, noting that she didn't think that Kyle was thinking about such a thing, because in that first cave, where all those who entered the world of training ended up, she almost went crazy, and she had an insane desire to kill someone, so she stopped on this path. Kyle took note of the girl's choice without responding. He remembered again the system messages popping up asking if he wanted to return to the original world. And if he really wanted this, then he needed to see the end of this world. Kyle answered to himself that he expected that Alice would be able to understand him, because the guy was thinking about such a message the whole time he was there. A business-class car stood at the edge of the forest waiting for its passenger. The driver looked at his watch impatiently, as his boss was late. He heard the sound of the back door opening, and through the rearview mirror he finally saw the one he had been waiting for so long. The driver immediately turned to the passenger, seeing her injury and asking if everything was okay with the deputy head of the guild, clarifying that she even used shadow play, and wondering how strong her opponent was. Alice only noted that even such a powerful technique did not allow her to touch her opponent with a dagger, and he exceeded all her expectations. She spent too much energy, which eventually ran out, which the driver could not believe. Remembering the fight, Alice realized that Kyle had never even attacked her. Moreover, the girl had no idea how he blocked her daggers. Her mood was too depressed after the fight, especially when she admitted complete defeat. The driver said that he thought it would be better if Kyle Benet did not join the Twilight, and asked if the deputy head of the clan had thought about sending the guy to the Sun Festival. Alice, whose shoulder was bandaged with the shirt of her former rival, said that to stop Max Paxville they definitely needed Kyle Benet, and she was ready to do anything for it. The girl remembered the frightening feeling of danger and Max's instruction that wisdom was with him, and she had to follow his will. He argued that the girl was obliged to obey the heavenly warrior, and Alice, either following those precepts or choosing her own path, told the driver that they must do their best to help Kyle Benet. Kyle returned home after meeting with Alice, informing his sister of his arrival. Becca ran into his arms excitedly as soon as she saw him. The guy didn't expect his sister to be so worried, asking what happened. But his sister was not only happy to have him back, she was also angry with Kyle. After all, she could not find a place for herself from excitement while he was away, asking next time not to go anywhere, not to take risks and just stay at home. Becca was haunted by memories of the past, and she shared her experiences with her brother, saying that every time he leaves, it seems to her that he will never return. Kyle touched the girl's head, saying that he understood her feelings. At the same time, he warned her that he wanted to become a hunter, which contradicted his words about caring. This news upset Becca, and she asked Kyle if he really wanted to die, since he chose this way. The guy showed her a small cube shimmering with all shades, saying that Alice had given it to him, calling it a mystical cube. Kyle said that Libora said that only with this cube could Kyle get the hunter status window, to which Becca, who was skeptical, also wished her brother good luck without due joy. Her mood did not knock down Kyle's determination, and he took the cube, preparing to begin his journey. The mystical cube in his hands began to glow, activating and beginning the process. Bright multicolored lights illuminated Kyle and the entire room. Gradually, the glow of the cube began to fade, as did its integrity. The cube floated with its edges on top, as if it had melted. Eventually, the light emanating from the cube finally went out, leaving the guy with the remains of the cube in his hands. Confused and slightly upset, Kyle asked his sister whether Alice Libora had deceived him, but Becca said that it was as it should be and advised him to shout status window. The brother listened to his sister's advice and uttered the cherished phrase, immediately after which 2 different information signs opened in front of him, one of which was blue and the other yellow. The yellow one was a status window from the world of Nurim, and Kyle had never seen it before, but it showed his strength from that world, informing him that his level was 100, which was the maximum, and all other skills were also developed at the maximum level. When Kyle looked at the blue sign, trying to understand what it meant, empty meanings appeared before him. The blue plaque symbolized the status window of the hunters, characterizing Kyle, indicating that his level was first, and his health bar was full. He had one stat point available, which he could use for strength, endurance, agility, intuition, or spirit. What Becca was most interested in about this brother's sign was what grade her brother had. But when she saw the required line, she froze in shock, because the sign said that Kyle did not have a class. Delighted by the negative result, she told Kyle with a joyful smile that even though the hunter was definitely not his, he should just forget about it. And Kyle looked at her incomprehensibly, clarifying why she had decided so. Becca clarified whether she told him about the hierarchy of hunters, and realizing that she did not, said that hunters are divided into 6 classes, the first of which were warrior, priest, and mage. Then came the priest and the assassin and the archer, but there were many more classes, if the higher ones were included, and these 6 were considered the main ones. For example, Becca was from the archer class, and her highest class was a sniper, and the girl also added that the main classes are innate, and cannot be changed in any way. And Kyle has no class at all, which means he didn't have a chance from the beginning and won't have a chance in the future. Defeated by this knowledge, Kyle sat deflated while Becca continued, saying that in general you can become a hunter without a class, and the whole problem is only in skills, hoping that in this way she could completely demotivate her brother, and hoping that he would give up. To increase his level, according to Becky's story, the hunter needed experience, and points could only be obtained by defeating a monster, but this required skills. And unlike hunters with 6 main classes, hunters without a class did not have these skills, and they could only be obtained using a skill cube. But the cheapest hand-to-hand combat skill cube cost 20 million, and the fencing skill cube cost 25 million, which were huge sums. Becca frowned, turning her gaze to Kyle. The sister asked him if he had money with a demonic smile, causing Kyle to turn away. A sudden realization struck Kyle, preventing him from losing heart. He had Alice Labora, and the deputy head of the Dawn Guild must have a lot of money, and this thought cheered Kyle up, and made Becca turn away in annoyance, upset that she could not dissuade her brother. Kyle took a deep breath, mentally noting that he might have problems without this alliance with the Dawn Guild, but then he remembered that this was not his main problem. Remembering his life in Mirim, he wondered why he did not have a class, because he was a genius, which, in his opinion, would not be seen in the history of Mirim, and here he did not have the talent of a hunter, because such a discrepancy was impossible. Mount Chia, located in the training dungeon of the Dawn Guild, was calm, and fancy rabbits were jumping around. Up close, they looked like cute little animals with red fur collars. But this was a lie, because rabbits were actually monsters for practicing skills, and because of them, this dungeon was called the Rabbit Dungeon. Becca destroyed one of them with a well-aimed shot of a fiery arrow from her bow. The girl turned to her brother, asking if he had seen it, and Kyle, not too impressed, stated that yes, they had caught a rabbit, not understanding what it was about. Becca reproachfully replied that with such an attitude, all novice hunters end badly. And before their eyes, the defeated rabbit turned into a red gem, and Kyle said that this would not happen to him. Picking up the gem from the ground, he asked Becky if it was a monster stone, and whether it could be exchanged for money, which she confirmed, adding that the gem was an environmentally friendly natural resource that brought a huge amount of energy when processed, and it was precisely because of such stones, nuclear power plants disappeared one after another. At the same time, Becca warned her brother to be careful, because no matter how strong Kyle is, he does not know what can happen in the dungeon. The guy at that time, with a series of light blows, killed many rabbits at once, forcing his sister to look at him in bewilderment. Frustrated that he wasn't even listening to what she was saying, Becca watched her brother from the side while Kyle realized that him using normal attacks to defeat monsters wasn't giving him any experience. His blue hunter stat plate had not changed at all. Taking a closer look at her, he noticed the presence of fencing skills. He decided to ask his sister about this skill. While the sign said that this skill was a class skill, was passive and could be used without costing mana, had a rarity of D-, which meant that it was available to everyone, and the skill level was D-, indicated the lowest value, and it was also a warrior's class skill, it was possible to improve it. and it was activated automatically when using a weapon that was a sword. Becca patted her brother on the shoulder, telling him not to worry, and telling him that they had an entire dungeon at their disposal, and he could easily master this skill, while Kyle was amazed to realize that the rarity and skill level were very low. The guy had never had AD level before, which didn't make him happy at all. His sister at this time tried to reach him, reasoning that although she did not know what kind of contract Kyle had with Alice Labora, the deputy head of the Dawn Guild was an unusual person, and Becca was sure that she would try to make the most of Kyle's presence in the clan benefits. But looking at her brother, she realized that he was not listening to her at all. Becca called Kyle again, seeing that something strange was happening to him, because he seemed to be using his power, and his eyes were glowing blue. The girl called out to him in confusion, wanting to attract his attention. She was about to touch him, but he grabbed her hand. He turned around with a joyful smile, announcing that he had found a better place. They moved there quite quickly. Startled, Becca froze, looking around, unable to utter the question the first time, stopping only at the word how much. This part of the dungeon was no different in appearance from the previous one, but there were so many rabbits here that Becca couldn't ask about their number the first time, finally asking the cherished question, to which Kyle calmly replied that there were exactly 337 of them here, specifying that he counted them along the way. The siblings stood on the dais, and even from here, Becca knew there were too many bunnies, so she reached for her bow, communicating her thoughts to Kyle, saying that he was still at the beginner level, but he assured her sister that there was nothing to worry about how. The amazed Becca only managed to call her frivolous brother, seeing how he serenely smiled and jumped off the cliffs. Kyle, while flying from the cliff to the rabbits, was talking about how he had never experienced such shame. He, being an immortal sword emperor who had trained with the sword for several hundred years, turned out to be a D-level swordsman here, and without a grade. As he flew down, Kyle easily drew his sword from its sheath. He swung, making a circular pass and twisting in the air. He landed on the ground with great force, leaving a mark on the soil, and a large energy wave spreading around, because in fact, Kyle was very angry. He found himself below in a clearing full of rabbits. His sister, who remained on the hill, angrily called him an idiot, reporting that she almost fainted from surprise, but Kyle only complained about her constant swearing. And then he turned to the angry rabbits, asking if they were ready. At the same moment, many blue signs with a warning exclamation mark appeared in front of him. They all contained a warning from the fencing skill, insisting that Kayla should attack in lines. But the young man, not deciding whether they were trying to help him or harm him, simply cut them down with a sword. He didn't have time to deal with these notifications, because they only bothered him. He was determined, and some incomprehensible notifications were just an imperceptible hindrance. As soon as Kyle got rid of the signs, many rabbits immediately rushed to attack the frozen guy. They bared their teeth threateningly with their powerful and sharp teeth, wanting to get rid of the guy. Kyle tightened his grip on his sword, swinging to strike and activating his skills. His eyes glowed blue and his sword strikes were filled with the blue energy of his skill, striking down his enemies. This world did not need to teach Kyle swordsmanship, because in Urim he was already a master of this skill. All his blows reached their target, and the rabbits were defeated. The guy continued to think that skills appeared in this world 14 years ago, only 14 years, while Kyle spent 140 years in Urim, which means this world needs at least another 100 years to teach him how to use the fencing skill with its pop-up tablets. Another set of signs appeared in front of Kyle, blocking his path. He stared at them blankly, trying to understand what they wanted from him this time. He read another warning, looking at the text in amazement and incomprehension. This time, unlike the previous one, the signs announced that he had reached level A+, and Kyle turned around, asking the sister who had approached what that meant. Kyle poked hard at the notifications, not understanding how to close them or how to change the settings. Becca stood aside in shock, asking what her brother had just done. Kyle waved it off, saying that he didn't understand it, and saying that all of his fencing power should be displayed in the system, and the fact that he couldn't find it was probably a mistake. The girl still couldn't understand where Kyle got such speed and how he was able to instantly reach level A+. Kyle finally found what he was looking for and called out to his sister. He asked if she mentioned that it was possible to gain experience points even with a passive skill that does not consume mana, and the girl agreed with this. Kyle smiled as he looked at the divine power skill he was able to unlock in the tablet. A window opened for him, informing him that he has the divine power ability, which gives him a special origin skill. Kyle's rarity and mastery level of this skill was A+, which meant that he had a supreme ability of mysterious origin and could freely transform his cultivation. Kyle excitedly tested his fists, explaining that he just wanted to make his life easier in the future. The guy accelerated and then swung sharply. His next hand-to-hand blow had devastating power, destroying everything around the epicenter of the blow. Brand Becky reported that he can now use his martial art to gain experience. He didn't so much ask as he simply told his sister that the other strongest hunters in their world, Alice Labora, who was the deputy head of the Dawn Guild, and Max Paxville, who was the head of the Twilight Guild, most likely received their origin skills as well. Becca, stunned, could not utter a word again. She just clutched the bow in her hands, looking at this and feeling empty, because her brother used a normal stream of air to strike. The girl hesitantly called out to her brother, attracting his attention. Becca stood at a distance behind him, but she was serious, saying that she would like to know something. She gripped her bow tighter, giving herself confidence, and spoke, saying that she had guessed about it from the moment of his victory over the head of the Dawn Guild, Mr. Ken. But today she saw his power with her own eyes, saying that it was amazing. The girl remembered what happened in the Red Wolf's dungeon, how her comrade was killed by a red wolf. She remembered how she herself was in danger, realizing that this might not happen again in the near future. But the incident with the betrayal of one's own fighter can be repeated, and there is no guarantee that this will never happen. But it was Becca who led the team at that time, and she blamed her own weakness for their death. With tears in her eyes, the girl raised her bow, unable to look anywhere else, and saying that she didn't want to regret this anymore. She raised her head to her brother, continuing that she knows that she cannot become as strong as her brother, but still asks if he could teach her at least something in martial art. Kyle put a calming hand on his sister's shoulder, assuring her that she shouldn't get excited and that he would tell her everything. The guy was happy to help her, although he warned that he had never had students and would be a harsh teacher. Touched by her brother's agreement, Becca looked at him with delight, while Kyle thought that there was nothing wrong with his sister's request, because Becca will not always be there for him, and she must learn to stand up for herself, because no one knows what can happen in future. The guy himself said that her training makes sense, which means they should move to another point, and the girl could only clarify in surprise when he managed to put the dots in a circle. They used their powers to make quick jumps to move around the dungeon. During their journey, Becca asked Kyle what he would do next, since he had already mastered the skill of fencing. Oblivious to the danger from above, she asked if Kyle was going to use his warrior skills. The guy was more attentive, and he noticed the hostile rabbits. Swinging and activating his skills, he told the girl that he could increase the level using his powers. With the next blow, he sent an energy-charged stream of air into the attack, hitting the target exactly. Becca covered her face from the dirt caused by the explosion of her brother's powers at the target point, agreeing that for his situation everything was not so clear on how to develop the path beyond the hunter. Kyle motioned to stop her from going any further, noting that he could now use his martial arts to develop. But to become a strong hunter, it is not enough for him to just be strong, but he needs to learn certain class skills, and they just happened to be in a clearing full of rabbits. Kyle remembered Alice Labora, who was also near him, and upon her return was able to become stronger. To do this, she combined her skills and martial arts, and Kyle needs to find skills compatible with his martial arts in order to increase his strength. A sudden realization struck Becky's brother, causing him to open his eyes in surprise. The guy jumped far ahead, leaving his sister alone and causing her misunderstanding. Kyle rushed to the place where the most rabbits were. He filled his fist with power again and swung his fist to strike. The guy remembered that he had already been able to combine any skill with his strength. At the same time, in this world he also saw those skills that would be difficult to combine with his powers, for example, a magician's skill called Fireball, and in general all magic. Kyle directed a balloon filled with his energy at the bunnies, again exploding the final target and achieving his intended purpose. Becca called out to him, warning him not to continue like this, but Kyle interrupted her, calling her name in warning, because he had just chosen the area of /U200B/U200 bunters that he would be able to combine with his martial arts. Sitting on the grass in a hail of gems that crumbled around, what remained of the dead carcasses of rabbits, he told the girl that he had decided to become a magician. Becca, as all previous times, did not appreciate Kyle's choice, because she had already told him that since he did not have a class, it would be very difficult for him on the path of a hunter, and since he also chooses the path of a magician, it would be many times more difficult, because magician skill cubes were even more difficult to obtain. The girl sighed heavily, turning away from the jubilant guy, deciding that she would leave everything as it was. Kyle again opened 2 tablets with his characteristics, one of which characterized him in this world and was blue, and the other transferred all his characteristics to their Mirim and was yellow, and the guy noted that he was already quite familiar with these 2 systems, and it is certain that there was a very large gap between the system of Mirim and the hunter. Becca, who was bagging up gems, remarked out loud that they no longer had to worry about waste, while Kyle reflected that Mura's stats window only showed his body's own stats, and there was nothing there other than the internal and external levels. But even this small knowledge would have been very useful to him while he was in Mirim. But looking at the hunter stat plate, it showed everything from strength to mana, and it was more customizable and had a lot of features. Kyle noted that the nature of the appearance of the systems was different, as if they were created by different people with similar abilities, and the hunter system gave experience and resources from killed monsters, and the receipt of rewards was instantaneous, which provided a reliable basis for strengthening, and with it anyone could become stronger with a little effort. While in Mirim, the path to cultivation was much slower and more dangerous, and to achieve a breakthrough there, you had to spend a lot of time on practice, and you had to risk your life to improve your skills. True, sometimes you could just get lucky there, and according to legends, the hero of the past, who was called the Heavenly Warrior, became a god, and wrote that magical book Heavenly Harmony of Pure Reason. Kyle remembered that this book was an ancient treasure that many fought over in Mirim, and it was in the cave with this book that he woke up when he got to Mirim, not understanding where exactly he was. While he and his sister walked further, the guy continued to reason that at the moment, when he found himself in Mirim and took everything that was happening for granted, he lost sight of one circumstance. If for his home world, the being that gave people the hunter system was the one who calls herself the goddess, does this mean that the creature that sent Kyle to Mirim was her enemy? That chained guy who calls himself the Sky Warrior? Such thoughts made Kyle angry, because he hated the one who sent him to Mirim. Time passed, which gave Kyle the opportunity to get used to everything. Thanks to the support of Guild Deputy Dawn Alice Libor, Kyle became stronger. For a whole month he had been quietly wandering through the dungeons, raising his level, and at some moments, when meeting with particularly strong and atypical opponents for the earthly world, it seemed to him that he was no longer in his native world. During this time, the guy reached level 22, and when fighting monsters that resembled livestock, he always joked about how he would like freshly cooked chicken. He did not forget about his promise to his sister, teaching her about the 365 vessels in the human body. He also learned to speak in a normal way, so as not to stand out. Looking at Becca, Kyle realized that for her age it was too late to study martial arts, although there was one way out, and Becca, sitting in front of him, asked him what happened. He carefully held her behind her back, wanting to prepare her a little for the implementation of his idea, asking his sister not to roar or scream, even if she bleeds. Such an address slightly frightened Becca, because Kyle said it unexpectedly, right after their joint meditation. The next moment, she screamed heart-rendingly, so that it could be heard not only in their house, because the brother pierced his sister's vessels and directly injected his power into her. Thanks to this, Becky was able to advance, and her skills improved. She could now pierce stones with her arrows, although during the procedure she almost burned Kyle's hair. At the next meeting between Alice and Kyle, the deputy of the guild, Dawn, clarified whether everything was fine in their family. However, she was not going to be nice for long and asked if she could get straight to the point. Kyle noticed that Alice usually did not stand on ceremony, immediately saying what was needed, and the girl agreed, simply saying that Becky's brother should consider this a unique feature of Libora. The guy asked the girl what the girl was up to, since she had not called them for a long time, and offered to meet. Alice agreed, closing the distance between herself and Kyle with a smile and addressing him by name. She extended her hand to him with a serene smile and asked if he would like to go on a date with her. Kyle, who had not expected such a question, stared at her in surprise. It took him some time to answer, crossing his arms over his chest, that although such invitations were new to him, this time he would refrain, to which the girl asked him not to refuse so immediately. She said that in a town not far from them, a new dungeon had opened, with a danger level of 10, and a recommended level of 45 to 50, and such a dungeon is usually only allowed to high-ranking hunters, and of course this is not the best place to go with someone 20th level. At the same time, Alice looked at Kyle with a smile and clarified that if it was him, then his low level would not be an obstacle to such a trip. The guy asked with confusion whether the girl wanted to go there together, and if so, why. Alice reported that high-level dungeons have hunter number control, which prevents large groups from going there, and she wants Kyle to quickly gain strength as a hunter. The guy grinned, picking up a bowl and clarifying that the deputy head of the Dawn Guild wants his improvement to accelerate. The girl indignantly pointed out that he uses terrible and outdated language, even though he has lived for more than a century, to which Becky's brother irritably replied that he understands, but he doesn't look old. Moving the cup away, he noted that whatever their union was, he only supported it, and he doesn't understand why Labora needs to make him stronger and worry about it. Alice asked if Kyle had heard about the Sun Festival. She explained that this is an annual event held between the Dawn and Twilight guilds, which helps to show off the full strength of the strongest guilds in Korea. But this is only a facade and everyone around will think that they are strengthening relationships. But in fact, these competitions determine positions of power. The Sun Festival can be compared to a small war. Right now, the Dawning and Twilight guilds are fighting over the rights to the dungeons, and most of the fights will take place within the dungeons, so the general public won't know much about their differences. But all this will resemble the beginning of a major war, comparable to the situation when small matches are thrown into a powder magazine. Kyle asked the girl incomprehensibly why the guilds were fighting at all, since if it was a fight over interests, then it was completely stupid. Pouring tea into her bowl, Alice explained that the head of the Twilight Guild, Max Paxville, was to blame for everything, since everything was stable before. But at some point the guy chased power like crazy. Labora replied that Max began to obey the one called the Sky Warrior, which amazed Kyle. He resolutely rose from the table, immediately attacking Alice with questions about the relationship between Max Paxville and the Heavenly Warrior. But the girl said that she knew nothing about the Heavenly Warrior, and only heard that Max Paxville had received a message from the Sky Warrior in the Murim stats window. Kyle returned to his seat, wondering what kind of message it could be as the girl continued talking, saying that she could not confirm whether it was true or not, because the characteristics windows were not visible to anyone. At the same time, she said that even if Max received an order from the Heavenly Warrior, she still could not understand why he was doing this, because before they were friends. After all, they were the only ones who experienced the horror of Murim. Kyle thought about her words, looking at the girl seriously. Alice looked up at him, and asked Kyle to take part in the Sun Festival as an ally of the Dawn. The weather was beautiful outside when they finished their conversation. The driver was again waiting for Alice in the car not far from that cafe. Returning to the car, the girl continued to explain to Kyle that the balance of power between the guilds had recently been on the side of the Twilight, and all due to the fact that they had captured all the dungeons and carried out frequent raids. If this information becomes known at the Sun Festival, then the Dawn Guild will come to an end. The girl unobtrusively reminded that at such an important moment they lost their leader Mr. Kan, who was their main strength, and after these words Kyle began to torment her conscience. The guide brushed aside his worries, saying that he understood the situation in general terms, but he never heard from Alice the reason for the benefit of his growth for their guild. The girl closed her eyes, turning to the window and announcing that the Sun Festival would be broadcast to the whole world, and there would be a lot of foreign press there. Pointing her finger at Kyle, she asked if the guy still plans to show martial arts around the world, and that it would be difficult to do this without public confirmation, because few people would simply believe in words that he came from Murim, and on the part of other hunters it will just make you jealous. Once again, clarifying, Alice asked if he was ready to confront the World Association of Hunters, to which he refused, although he added that he still planned to fight them all. Turning away from him again, the deputy of the Dawn Guild informed him that he needed to use only the skills of hunters at the Sun Festival, with which he agreed, because Katzel owed Alice as a whole, and therefore could not object. Satisfied with his answer, the girl was glad that he agreed and asked the driver to give her the suitcase, which surprised Kyle, who did not expect to need anything else from him. Alice opened the suitcase, revealing 6 magic skill cubes, and 1 magic skill each for a magician and a sorcerer, which the guy had requested from her earlier. Bribed by this, Kyle began to take it easy on his decision to take part in the Sun Festival as an ally of the Dawn Guild, since he was planning to meet with Max Paxville anyway. Only in addition to the cube, Alice also gave him paper, and not just one paper, but several that began to fall on him from the sky, finding themselves with huge stacks of documents surrounding the guy, who doesn't understand what it means. Alice explained that, unlike Nirim, there were legal processes on Earth, and all these official documents were needed in order to confirm their union, to agree not only on the guild's help to Kayla, but also on Kyle's help to the guild. And the other document that the guy was holding in his hands was the official document of registration of the hunter in the guild. But Kyle did not understand why he should register the guild, and the girl explained that for mercenary hunters the process of registering for the holiday is very difficult, and because of this there will be problems in processing documents confirming their union. Waving a suitcase in front of Kyle, Alice asked if he knew how much all these cubes cost, and said that any of them was more expensive than a house, and therefore, even because of them, it was necessary to sign an agreement, to which the down-to-earth Kyle said that this was necessary speak from the very beginning. As he signed the next paper, he whined that there were too many papers. There they needed to come up with a name for the guild, and Alice suggested that this was just a formality, and you could write anything. Kyle, after thinking a little, wrote, Guild, Martial Arts, agreeing to everything that the girl offered him. Therefore, after paperwork, he went with her to a completely different place, the Wyvern Dungeon of a town not far from them. The blue light of energy that transported them to a dungeon full of flying dragons wyverns quickly dissipated, and the guy noticed that he felt as if he was shuttling between the house and the dungeon every day, as if he were going to school. Alice, looking at the sky, warned the guy to be careful, since the creatures were one at a time and were not too strong, but they reported that there were an awful lot of them around. Kyle confirmed her words, reporting that he sensed more than 3,000 monsters. He activated his power while looking forward, since in any dungeon he acted according to a certain pattern. He sent a stream of destructive energy electrified at the flying wyverns with joy, because the more targets there were, the better it was for him. Taking a couple of steps back to swing, Kyle prepared for the next attack. He swung his aerial whip, filled with deadly energy, ready to crush his targets. With one blow, he managed to hit many targets at once. As always, Alice watched in amazement as the dead wyverns fell to the ground, turning into gems, and wondered how Kyle was able to master the skill so quickly, because she gave him the magic cubes just a couple of hours ago. The guy explained that magical energy and energy management are very similar, so he had no problems, and Alice only remarked in frustration that it wouldn't have worked out that way for her. Looking at how many opponents he defeated, the girl noticed that he shouldn't overdo it, because otherwise his mana points would run out. But Kyle told her not to worry, because he was a martial arts magician. Alice still could not believe the number of monsters that the guy killed at once, clarifying that he was not acting honestly. Kyle missed her question while collecting gems, and then asked if the monsters in dungeons were always the same type. Alice said that he was right, but Kyle then noted that this fact was quite strange. The girl began to explain that the dungeons appeared 13 years ago, and then they filled the whole world. Only when she said this, she did not notice that a monster had appeared high in the sky. This monster was descending rapidly, but even the wyverns could not notice it, while Alice talked about how there was not a single dungeon where there was more than one type of monster. Meanwhile, the claw of an unknown creature of a huge creature dealt with one of the wyverns, and another low-level wyvern was thrown straight into the rock by a powerful force. It was a huge dragon, a different type of monster in this dungeon, refuting Alice's words that this could not happen. At this time, in a completely different place, a man scooped some from a bucket of grain into a plate. He threw this food to the fish, who jumped out of the water with a desire to eat. It was the villa of Max Paxville, the head of the Twilight Guild in Seoul, the capital of Korea. And behind the man feeding the fish stood a secretary guy in a suit with a folder with a lot of notes, addressing the one who fed the fish as the head. The secretary's name was Sam Brideau, and he was a subordinate of the Twilight Guild, who informed the man on the shore that they had received information about the suspicious whereabouts of the deputy head of the Dawn Guild, Alice Libor. Sam also said that the Dawn Guild had a newcomer who was supported with all their might, and people said that it was with him that Alice went to clear the dungeon. The man asked if Alice had personally gone to clear the dungeon, once again throwing food to the fish. Sam confirmed that as a result of an internal investigation, they were able to find out that this hunter, with whom Alice went into the dungeons, was the brother of one of the leaders of the Dawn Group's Becky Benet. The guy's name was Kyle, and there was one oddity in his biography: he disappeared at 14 years, but recently showed up again. The secretary continued to report, saying that his appearance coincided with the resignation of Mr. Khan, that he was the director of the Dawn Guild, but the man stopped Sam, asking where Kyle had been for 14 years. No matter how much Sam dug through his papers, he never found information about this, since their intelligence still could not figure it out. But Sam said that they were able to find out something else: Mr. Khan did not resign, but simply disappeared, and the last thing he managed to do was go to Becca to teach her a lesson for the murder of his son Gray. The man feeding the fish took off his straw hat, putting it aside, and saying that he was dead. He explained this again to Sam, saying that Mr. Khan was definitely dead, and the secretary noted that this was not bad news. The man turned out to be the leader of the Dawn Guild, Max Paxwell, and he told the secretary that Kyle Beckett was most likely in Murim. Kyle, meanwhile, used all his strength to continue fighting the monsters in the dungeon. His attack was successful, and all the monsters on the way were defeated. Kyle pumped his fist with a joyful smile, noting that this was the kind of pastime he considered fun. Alice, who was watching him, reminded him of herself, stopping his delight and telling him that she understood his condition. At the same time, she noticed that a whole hour had already passed since Kyle began testing his new skills, and having defeated such a large number of wyverns, the guy felt great, and the girl didn't even notice any signs of depletion of his health points. And during this time Kyle practically cleared the entire dungeon, to which he reported that he was already finishing. Kyle closed his eyes with the air of a sage, noting out loud that he didn't know how to quickly explain everything. He asked if Libora remembered that suitcase with cubes and one of those that was inside, which was called a life exchange cube, to which Alice agreed that she remembered and replied that it was an emergency skill that could exchange health points for points mana, clarifying whether everything is in order with this cube. Kyle replied that in Urim, where he and Libora were, after reaching the 35th external and internal level, an etheric body was created, which, as the energy increased, developed and tended to infinity, and after reaching the 40th level, the hero acquired immortality, and at the same time the state he was supported precisely by the energy of this etheric body, and since this energy was infinite, then life became immortal, and therefore now, using this skill, he could draw endless. Alice did not expect such a complex chain, feeling devastated by the excess of information. Kyle tried to simplify things again by having her focus on the concept of mana. He asked her to imagine the source of infinite energy that Kyle brought with him from Mirim, and then imagine that, thanks to the cube, he converted this infinite energy into an inexhaustible source of energy. And he was capable of this simply because even if these martial arts were of different types, having reached the limit of one, it is much easier for him to reach the limit of another, and therefore for Kyle now there is nothing unattainable, because he has already reached the limit in one. Alice only had time to ask how this was possible, but Kyle did not answer, intending to jump to the remaining monsters to defeat them, because he wanted to destroy all the little things that remained in the area before the boss battle, leaving the girl in bewilderment. The deputy head of the guild, Dawn, noted for herself that Kyle's strength was not his only advantage, because he had a very strong character, and now Alice considered herself an idiot, because she not only tried to use Kyle before, but also wanted to kill. But now she understood that she doesn't have to worry about the Sun holiday with such an ally. Carried away by her thoughts, she did not pay attention to the remaining monsters attacking her, because she was on the alert. With another blow, she defeated the attacking monster, continuing to think about Kyle and his example. Inspired by his example, the girl wondered if she could reach the same level. But the monsters continued to attack and their number did not decrease too much. But the girl was alert, and her strength and the power of her energy-filled blades were still enough to hit the flying wyverns. True, such a battle had its drawbacks, because Alice did not know how to fly, and therefore, during the fall, Only with the help of her blade, which she caught on the rock, was she able to stop herself from falling. Only hanging over the abyss on one hand was she able to appreciate how high she and Kyle had climbed in this new dungeon. Gathering her strength, she pushed off with her feet, making a big leap back to the top. The girl professionally planned her trajectory so as to defeat many monsters at once. Alice landed confidently on the ledge after another attack, looking back down into the gorge again. A lot of the gems that the fallen monsters had turned into lay there, and she wondered when Kyle was going to take it all. Libora hid her blades in a magical vault, thinking about what she had learned about the dungeon, and thinking that when she returned here next time, she should increase the level of the dungeon, since the level inside, according to the characteristics, was much higher than it should have been, and since there were flying monsters, it was generally much more difficult to deal with them. Looking around, she wondered which raid would be better for this dungeon, and that next time she should take 5 hunters, a tank, a mage, an archer, a priest, and someone melee into her team. But thinking about the future, she missed the changes taking place in the present. Someone very large rushed right over her head. Alice looked up with a question, not understanding how someone so big could be in this dungeon. It was a monster of a different level and larger size, and this was the first time she had encountered one. She barely had time to jump to the side to escape the attack of this creature. But an equally large dragon, on the other hand, flew up to her, intending to kill her, although Alice was not going to give up so easily. She took out her blades from the magical spatial storage again, preparing to fight. Only the loud noise of huge wings right behind her ruined the girl's plans. The huge monster could not only attack her, but with its wings it created air currents filled with magic that were much stronger than the usual attacks of monsters, and Alice, who did not expect this, was unable to cope and repel this attack. Carried away from her place by this energy wave, she fell, frightenedly thinking that only demonic force could manifest itself in this way, and the girl did not understand where she could get into the dungeon. The monster attacking her was not going to give up and pursued the disoriented girl, who believed that similar appearances of monsters of other levels could be a mistake in the dungeon system. But then someone caught the girl serving and preparing for death. It was a joyful Kyle, smilingly informing Libora that the monster had finally appeared. Picked up in her arms, Alice was surprised at Benet and asked him if the guy had been waiting for this particular monster and knew about it. Kyle only with a smile again explained to the one that he had already said, that when the entire dungeon is captured, stronger monsters appear in it. At this time, many demonic level monsters filled the dungeon, while Alice clarified that it was Kyle who allowed such a monster to roam here, and the guy replied that he was just waiting, because the bosses needed to be dealt with at the end. Holding the girl in his arms, Kyle carefully informed her that even if such monsters were new to her, she shouldn't be distracted, but she shouldn't worry either. At the same time, he suggested that the slightly annoyed girl discuss the details later, but for now they should stop somewhere. Landing on the ledge with Libora, the guy thoughtfully noted that it was dinner time and asked what she would like and if she liked grilled food. Alice, who did not understand the hints, replied that she did not think now was the right time for dinner. At this time, Kyle concentrated a whirlpool of fiery whirlwinds in one hand, and the golden energy of electricity in the other. Raising 2 fists above his head and crossing them, he was able to fully appreciate his own power. Opening his eyes, he directed his gaze forward, telling the girl that she should wait for him, because today they will have fried chicken, and the giant monsters that were going to attack the guy standing on the hill were considered a wonderful dinner for him, because with his strength he was going to fry these flying monsters. Alice could only watch in amazement as all the monsters in the sky died from the enormous power Kyle put into his blow. A moment ago, she watched as Becky's brother first used fire and then pure energy, wondering if the guy could even hear what she was saying since he said he would use magic. At the same time, she could say with confidence that his technique was more reminiscent of ordinary strikes. Alice immediately pulled herself together, because these were not simple blows, since each of them was imbued with pure power, and it was incredible. But what happened next made her freeze in place, looking at the sky in disbelief. The air from above swirled, creating a distortion of the space of the dungeon. A huge green portal opened right in the center of the sky, from which even more frightening creatures immediately began to fly out, and Alice had no choice but to scream at Kyle to get out of there immediately. The girl couldn't believe that monsters just started appearing from the suddenly opened portal, because there were too many of these flying creatures, and she wasn't sure that Kyle was going to continue further, so she was going to save him by rushing from the ledge. But already in the air, she realized that next to Kyle it was even more dangerous, so she again shouted to the guy that he should run. The girl, confident that due to space distortions Kyle could not hear her, gathered all her strength to strike. She needed to save the guy, even if it meant destroying everything in her path. But monsters endowed with demonic power also did not fly in the sky just like that. They were the ones who took the force of the girl's blow. Alice was amazed, because it turned out that the monsters in the dungeon were smart, and now the little ones were taking the blow on themselves that Alice could not help Kyle. Shocked by this news, she could only continue to call out to Beckett and watch as the monsters of the dungeon formed a sphere. All the small and large monsters in the dungeon were actually flying in a circle, creating a ball in the air. Alice, observing their behavior, realized that she was right, and judging by the movements, the small monsters moved involuntarily, and the larger ones that appeared later commanded the smaller ones, and therefore, when she tried to attack with the big one, they ordered the small ones to shield themselves. It was the death of some for the lives of others, and now, in order to win, they must first defeat the big ones. Although she had no idea how to do this, the girl wanted to get to Kyle, although she didn't know if he was okay. Yes, she saw him, but the guy looked as if he had stayed there on purpose. Exhaling sadly, she noted in frustration that she did not understand what he was thinking about, because he could have told her everything through a mental connection. Noting what was happening around her, Alice realized that she had encountered such anomalies for the first time, and no matter how strong Kyle Benet was, it was dangerous. So she had to help, but since the creatures were in the air, she had no idea how to get there. Looking up, the girl noticed a small wyvern flying above her, which gave her an idea. She jumped on the monster's back, deciding that she could use the little one as a means to get to Kyle, because all the monsters were focused on him, although she should not let her guard down and hug the wyvern so that she would not be noticed. Alice sincerely sympathized with Kyle, wanting him to hold out longer, and thought that it would be easier if there were no anomalous monsters. Not noticing the danger, one wyvern, noticing Alice on the back of the other, crashed into her with force. The deputy head of the guild, Dawn, did not expect this, so she could not resist and fell down. At the same time, Alice was determined, and at the moment of the fall she turned over, immediately choosing another wyvern for herself, on whose back she could land. True, it was not possible to softly jump onto it, and only her blades saved Alice, with the help of one of which she latched onto the monster's body. A huge monster flying from below noticed her maneuver and was about to attack. But Alice was more cunning, because the girl was already prepared to attack this giant. In a one-on-one fight, none of the monsters could be a real threat to her, because it was not in vain that she followed the path of a killer, and so the girl used her ability Shadow Play to open a barrier to the same space in which she fought with Kyle for the first time. Only now it was a trap for a monster. But Libora did not have time to complete her maneuver, since behind the demonic monster there was a whole cloud of bodies of the same large giants, who were not going to give up their comrades so easily. Alice had to retreat, because she did not expect such coordinated actions from the dragons. A sudden beam of blue magical energy flashed a few centimeters from her face. It was Kyle who, finding himself in the midst of monsters, finally began to act on his potential. Alice had to shield her face with her hands from the blinding magical light of Kyle's energy. The amazed deputy guild leader Dawn turned around, surprised to notice that Kyle was able to summon a sword without a source of power, but summon not just one, but many swords, all of which he controlled alone. Benet was indeed surrounded by dozens of swords created from his energy, while Alice could not understand how much energy this guy had in his body. Kyle extended his hand, saying that it seemed time for him to stop pretending to be a hunter. His one movement was enough for all the swords to attack the monsters, and not one of them missed, reaching the goal and killing everyone hostile to the couple in the dungeon. Since the guy attacked in all directions at once, he was able to hit all flying targets. A moment later, all the monsters turned into gems, which rushed to the ground in a rain of red dots, as Alice watched thoughtfully. The girl understood that only thanks to Kyle Benet they managed to cope with this, remembering how the monsters began to fly out of the portal. She wondered what she would do if the same situation happened in other dungeons. Will she and her weaker employees be able to cope with such portals, not to mention destroy such high-level monsters as easily as Kyle. Alice was immersed in her thoughts that at the moment she was too busy with the Sun Festival, and as soon as she immediately investigated the situation that had happened in this dungeon, not noticing Kyle, who was twirling an atypical blue gem in his hands. The deputy head of the Dawn Guild understood that as soon as she began an investigation, the head of the Twilight Guild, Max Paxville, would also find out about it, and then the Twilight Guild will be able to use the information and destroy her Dawn Guild. Lost in her thoughts, she did not know what she should do in this difficult situation. Kyle showed her the blue gem again, bringing it closer to her face to snap Alice out of her thoughts. The guy noticed that she was clearly thinking about something, and offered her a distraction by telling him what kind of blue gem it was, because it was different from the stones of other monsters. Alice was not surprised by the blue gem in his hands, explaining that it was a monster skill stone and such stones were not common, so Kyle was lucky. However, she was not surprised that such a pebble fell from such a huge monster. But that's not what the girl was interested in right now, so she turned to Kyle. Alice, taking into account everything new that she had learned today, wanted to have a serious conversation with him. A month later, passers-by on the street were discussing the list of participants in the Festival of the Sun, speculating about what would happen this time. They had already heard many rumors about the sensational newcomer Kyle Beckett, around whom there was a lot of information on the internet, some of which said that the guy became a hunter only a month ago. And at that time this conversation was heard by the secretary of the Twilight Guild, Sam, because heard while being in a worried mood. The man, sweating profusely, rose from his seat, because he did not at all like the fact that the sensational newcomer supported the Dawn Guild, a rival to them, since this threatened to turn into problems for the man. Sam looked at the top of the tall skyscraper, sadly noting that he would soon become a corpse, and he turned out to be right. Since during an emergency meeting of leaders at the headquarters of the Twilight Guild, one of the directors angrily broke a glass on his head. This aggressive man screamingly accused Sam of the fact that the novice hunter was chosen as a member of the Dawn, and Sam had not been able to make a report on the level, skills, or even the whereabouts of Kyle Beckett for the last 14 years. The head of the guild, Max Paxville, stopped this angry man by just calling him by name. The leader of the Twilight Guild himself did not look as worried or angry as his colleagues, but calmly enjoyed the golden drink with a smile while looking at those around him. But his calmness and friendly smile were deceptive, since one glance and commanding tone was enough for the angry director to sit down in his seat. The man moderated his ardor, obediently sitting down in his place. Max got up from his seat, telling his colleagues that all this information about the newcomer was a mistake, and the Dawn Guild was in a hurry, revealing its cards earlier than expected. Looking at Kyle's photo, Max said that since their competitors showed their fighter, then they should show their cards, because no one knows whether the opponent is bluffing or, on the contrary, got the jackpot. The head of the Twilight Guild was confident in his guild, telling his subordinates that they should destroy the sprouts of the enemy's power before they sprouted. After some time, the secretary of the head of the Twilight Guild found himself in a cafe, where he was waiting for someone at a table. Sam looked a little nervous, looking at his watch, and there was only a cup of coffee on his table. The man once again drew attention to the dial, noting that the time for the meeting had already arrived. Finally, the one he was waiting for appeared in the hall, so Sam jumped up from the table, greeting the man. He thanked the visitor for accepting the invitation and appearing at the meeting. His guest turned out to be Kyle Benet, the same rookie hunter who became an ally of the Dawn Guild. Kyle assessed the situation with his usual gaze, trying to understand whether there could be any potential threat in the cafe. Sam distracted him again, doing everything possible to keep his guest focused only on him, and extending his hand in greeting. Kyle turned his emotionless gaze to the secretary's hand, making him nervous. But he did not refuse the greeting, and shook it with his own. Kyle knew that the man's name was Sam, but he asked again to make sure, mentally remembering that his sister asked him to change his tone of voice, since after his stay in Mirim, Kyle often chose the wrong words and used rude constructions. Sam confirmed that he was indeed a representative of the Twilight Guild and said that it was an honor for him to meet Kyle, mentally noting that Kyle sounded rude. From Sam's thoughts, it became clear that he was not so much offended by Kyle's rude language, but on the contrary, it would help him not to forget about the purpose of this meeting, because he must find out as much information as possible, and the secretary of the Twilight Guild suggested that they move on to the purpose of this meeting. But first, Sam said that he wanted to use one device, frantically rummaging through his bag, to which Kyle looked at with an emotionless face, mentally noting that if everyone in the Twilight Guild was such a bungler as Sam looked, then should Dawn worry about them at all? The secretary, meanwhile, placed a small device on the table, and when Kyle asked what it was, he said that it was a magical instrument called a soundproof barrier, and when Sam pressed the button, a barrier was formed around him and Kyle, blocking external sounds, and the Twilight representative noted that their voices would not leak out either, and such a device was ideal for private conversations. Kyle grinned at the last definition of their meeting, and the secretary asked if the guy had any idea what they would talk about. Sam, who was serious, informed Benet that the Twilight Guild wanted to create an alliance with the Guys Guild. Kyle asked if Twilight had not seen the participants of the Sun Festival, saying that he already had a partner in the form of the Dawning Guild. The secretary confirmed that he was aware of this, and said that he was aware of the fact that the guild was putting every effort into the development of Kyle Benet. Sam's next argument was that Twilight also knew about the incident with the disappearance of Director Khan, and they also knew about the joint raid by the deputy head of the Dawn Guild into the dungeons. At the same time, the man noted that Kyle never joined the Dawn, and according to the reasoning of the Twilight Guild, Kyle created the Martial Arts Guild only in order to enter into an alliance with the Dawn Guild. Pathetically adjusting his glasses, Sam, who asked a rhetorical question about whether Kyle was interested in how Twilight guessed about this, answered himself, saying that it was all about the guy's close relationship with Dawn. Sam directly invited Kyle to join the Twilight, saying that he would promise him much better conditions than in Dawn, causing only a smile from Benet, who thought that the representatives of the Twilight Guild were much braver than he thought, and it would be hard to ignore this, and Benet also liked the secretary's insight, and the proposal as a whole was not bad, except for one but. Sam took out the papers, intending to discuss the specific conditions for the support of Benet from the Twilight Guild, but Kyle rose from the table, saying that he had had enough of this conversation, and the secretary might not continue further. Kyle turned around, leaving, finally telling the man that he had only come to find out why the Twilight Guild had invited him, but it turned out to be a waste of time, to which Sam objected that the guy was refusing without even having time to hear the proposal. The secretary stood up from his seat, shouting that the Twilight Guild was ready to offer Kyle an amount that was twice what Dawn had promised. Mentally nervous, Benet replied that he promised Alice Libor that he would not accept Twilight's offer, and noted that he was not the kind of person who was so interested in money. Sam tried to stop Kyle, but he wasn't going to listen to him anymore as he left the restaurant. The secretary was in despair, not knowing how to keep Benet. Suddenly, a visitor in a cap, taking off his mask, called out to Sam, asking how long he was going to stand, frozen in the middle of the restaurant. This guy turned out to be the disguised head of the Twilight Guild, Max Paxville. He addressed Sam by his last name, overwhelming him with his intimidating aura, and informing him that he seemed to have given his instructions clearly. All that was required of the secretary was to continue the conversation as long as possible. After all, if the conversation ended quickly, then there was no point in eavesdropping on it, since Sam was wearing a microphone, and the head of Paxville had an earpiece. Twilight's secretary was very sorry that he was such a nonentity and could not carry out this assignment, but Paxville quickly let this situation go. At the same time, Max noticed that Kyle seemed very strange to him. Paxville did not understand what Benet wanted, since he came to this meeting and did not agree to the money. At this time, in a completely different place, there was a conversation between those whom Max was thinking about. Alice Libora listened with interest to Kyle's results of the meeting with the Twilight Guild, noting that Paxville might have been upset. Kyle, on the other end of the line, noted that most likely the head of the Twilight Guild already knows that he is from Mirim, but when meeting in a cafe, the skill heavenly harmony of pure art did not resonate with the guy. Benet recalled that when he entered the cafe, he felt someone's energy, and Alice's assumptions came true. Max himself was there. The girl noted that the head of the Twilight Guild was quite cautious, and he was not one of those who sit and wait until the last perfect moment, so Dawn and Benet most likely won't be touched for now. And Kyle asked how the dungeon investigation was going, but the girl replied that there was no other information yet about how they saw the anomalies. With a smile, Alice especially noted that there were no anomalies since their last visit together. She remembered that when she asked Kyle for a serious conversation in the dungeons, she had just asked him for help with the investigation, and thanked her once. Benet asked if there were any other questions, and Alice replied that that was all she wanted to discuss. Labora only noted that Benet's tone was too gloomy, asking if the guy was okay. At this time, Kyle's sister called out to him, asking if he had finished. After all, Bika was waiting until he was free, and it was time for them to go. Kyle ended his conversation with Alice, agreeing with Becca and turning his attention to her. And the reason for his gloomy mood was that they were standing in front of the cemetery they had come to. Becca led him to the site where their family's remains were buried. Touching the camera with the funeral photograph, the girl with tears in her eyes told the dead souls of their parents that her brother had returned. Kyle stood gloomy against the opposite wall, considering his presence here a bad idea. His whole appearance was detached and closed, in contrast to what was happening. He looked at the camera with his parents' things, realizing that from the moment he disappeared and returned back, he had changed a lot, and even seeing the ashes of his parents, he felt nothing. Turning around, he headed out under the gaze of his crying and grieving sister, realizing that he should not show this insensitive side of his to Becca. After all, she had not forgotten how to experience emotions, and sincerely mourned the loss of loved ones. Turning to the ashes of her loved ones, Becca called out to Kyle, hesitantly asking if he was okay. After all, the girl noticed that he didn't look sad or upset. But Kyle had nothing to answer her, because he didn't want to upset her. Becca turned to Kyle, who was not far away, with an artificial smile, asking why he was silent. She was perceptive, asking if he really didn't feel anything in that place, and Kyle had to apologize. He asked the girl to forgive him, because for her he remained the same brother that he was, although in fact he could not show her what he had lost during the time he was away. These emotionless and detached words angered the girl. In anger, she shouted that the strangest thing now was Kyle's apology, since that was not what she wanted to hear. Having caught her breath, Becca turned to him more calmly. Remembering their past, she didn't ask him for as much as the guy might have thought. Tearing again, she asked why Kyle had changed so much, noting that even now he seemed too normal, and she just wanted to see the brother she once knew. Kyle slowly reminded her that it had been too long for him to be the same as before. But Becca said she didn't care because she didn't feel like she was living with her brother now. The girl stepped aside angrily, leaving Kyle alone. The guy once again thought that he should not have come to the cemetery. Remembering everything that happened to him in Murim, he thought that he did not know the answer to the question of why he changed, why this happened to him. At this moment, a yellow table with Murim's characteristics opened right behind him. It was a status window with a question slowly appearing, the first word of which was why. The celestial warrior who was now imprisoned by many chains tried to contact Kyle. The next phrase in the status window asked if Kyle still considered himself human, shocking the guy. It was this question of why he still considered himself human that was unexpected at the moment. Freezing in front of the status window, Kyle could not understand why this window appeared. He reread the question, emphasizing that someone doubted that he was human. Out of anger because nonsense was written in the status window, the guy clenched his hand into a fist. The next information board called on him to stop his pointless resistance, and the new one reported that if Kyle needed help, he could contact the sender of the messages. Benet noticed that the unknown person continued to talk to him one-sidedly, and asked who he was. The thought that struck him made him smile, and Kyle asked if the one who is called the Heavenly Warrior spoke to him. Then his interlocutor got angry, saying that he would take everything from the guy again, and he should just wait. But Benet called him crazy. The guy said that he didn't know who he was and why he needed it, but he suggested that if the Heavenly Warrior really had enough strength, he should try to do this, just as he had already taken away his parents. Only now Kyle said that if he couldn't, Benet himself would tear him apart. The last sign from Murim's window said that the guy should just wait. After that, the information window in front of him closed as if nothing had happened, leaving him alone. Only small yellow sparks of residual magic were carried by the wind around the guy. Only Benet was not frightened by this, because he was determined not to give up his own anymore. The sounds of Beak's footsteps rang out in the silence as she went to look for her brother. The girl, with eyes full of tears, looked around uncertainly, sure that he must have been nearby. But there was absolutely no one around, and the place where she expected to find her brother was empty. She noted in frustration that Kyle didn't follow her or look for him, and offendedly called him an idiot. A couple of days later, the long-awaited Sun Festival began, the broadcast of which was conducted by a very cheerful girl presenter, welcoming all listeners and viewers. There was a lot of enthusiasm in her, because today the public had to see the heroes who would explore dungeons and hunt monsters, and the girl knew that many were waiting for this holiday, and her calm colleague could only dream that she would calm down and calmly agree. But she couldn't be stopped so easily, and in a fit of emotion she rose from the table. She asked the audience not to worry, as everyone had been waiting for this day with the biggest event in Korea. It took place in a large sports arena that could accommodate many people, and was about to begin. The girl, while everyone was showing the joyful faces of the spectators, continued to say that this holiday was not only entertainment, but a place for strengthening ties between guilds and duels between hunters. And people could be present with the whole family, since something like this could only be seen at the Sun Festival. Kyle, who was in a special room at this time and heard everything that was happening outside the arena, noticed that the Sun Festival was more reminiscent of the Olympic Games. Alice Libora, who was sitting opposite him and sipping tea from a mug and saucer, said that no, and there was a big difference between these two events, because it was the hunters who aroused the greatest interest among the public. They found the office for the participants of the holiday furnished cozy and comfortable, and the girl continued to talk, saying that the interest in the event is also due to the fact that the hunter's strength is similar to what is shown only in the movies, and their fights look much more interesting than competitions between ordinary people. Elisa also added that such events help improve the image of hunters. Only the girl noticed that her friend's thoughts were occupied with something completely different, and he did not listen to her too carefully, so she called out to Kyle. The guy didn't answer, and she looked at him carefully again, leaving the cup of tea aside. Kyle looked suspiciously silent, and after assessing the situation, Libora assumed that he had quarreled with Becca. Watching the two, Libora wondered why there had been a strange atmosphere between the brother and sister since their arrival. Alice was perceptive, immediately realizing that Kyle could be to blame for this, and asking the guy what happened between him and Becca, clarifying what exactly his brother did wrong and where he made a mistake, surprising him with her insight. Benet gave in, asking Libora for help in finding a home and saying that he wanted to live in a quiet and secluded place, causing Alice to be confused. Kyle admitted to the deputy head of the Dawn Guild that he had received a message in Murim's status window, which shocked the girl. Benet said that he did not know the goals of this sky god, but Kyle was definitely his target. That's why he cared about his sister, because he didn't know who exactly his opponent was, and Becca was his only weakness and would definitely be under attack. It took Libora a while to process this information, as she couldn't believe that Kyle had received a message from the Celestial Warrior, even so suddenly. At the same time, Alice was sure that even if the Heavenly Warrior chose Kyle's sister as a target, it was better for the guy to stay with her, because living separately for the good of his sister would be unsafe. Kyle remained silent gloomily at the words of the deputy of the Dawn Guild. Benet, looking at the happy family on TV, said that Becca doesn't need a brother like him. He looked at the child in the frame and said that this was not his opinion, but his sister's position, because the person she once knew was not him. Therefore, the upset Benet continued his reasoning, reaching the idea that his sister might be better off if he simply disappeared, without expecting a blow from Alice. And Libora, without warning, punched him right in the chest, silencing him. Without looking the guy in the eye, she said that she didn't like to interfere in other people's affairs, but if her brother had told her that, she would have been offended by him, and would never have forgiven him. So she turned to the amazed Kyle, who knew more about his sister Becca than Libora, about to say something about his sister. But the door to the room opened and Alice's assistant appeared, asking for the deputy head of Dawn. The man found Alice and Kyle in a strange threatening pose, and shyly announced that the holiday was already beginning, cautiously apologizing. Libora pretended that nothing had happened, asking if her assistant had been taught what to do at the door, and telling Kayla that they would talk about it later, and asking the guy not to go anywhere until she came back for him. So Kyle Benet was left alone in the room with the opportunity to comprehend what had happened. The guy definitely didn't expect Alice Libora to be so angry with him, and now he had something to think about. At this time, an opening ceremony was to take place at the stadium before the start of the fights, which was announced to everyone by the presenter. She announced the organizers of the event, first introducing the Dawn Guild and its leader, Richard Fraz, whose class as a hunter was Crusader, and then she announced representatives of the Twilight Guild, on whose behalf the ceremony was to be opened by the deputy head of the guild, Sylvester Driegel, whose class as a hunter was a killer. The presenter at this time asked her colleague if he thought it was true that Alice Libora and Max Paxwell were from the same guild, and he answered that it was true, wondering how the friends who began the life of hunters together felt now that they met at the very top. An old acquaintance extended his hand to Alice Libor, standing on the stadium site surrounded by a crowd, saying that they had not seen each other for a long time. It was the peacefully smiling and well-dressed Max Paxwell, and the girl had to make a lot of efforts to contain her negative emotions. She also smiled sweetly back at him, asking in return how he was doing. She noted that the guy standing behind Max, his second-in-command Sylvester, now working for Twilight, had risen well. True, such words of hers offended Driegel, and he immediately grabbed his sword, but was stopped by a gesture from the head. Paxwell, without changing his facial expression, recalled in response that he knew that Alice was raising the level of the newcomer, and Max especially noticed that apparently she was doing this, since she loves helping the weak so much. Mentally, Alice was angry, remembering the past, and seeing Max as a terrible monster. The girl wanted with all her might to get rid of him with her own hands, since in the past he had brought a lot of pain to her and her loved ones. And Alice was determined, confident that no one could stop her from such reprisals. But that was in her mind, and in the real world she had to keep up appearances. Therefore, she replied with a confident smile that she would take such words from Max as a compliment. And Paxwell was pleased that his challenge was accepted by worthy opponents, former friends, and now enemies. They shook hands as the host said that the Sun Festival was beginning.